She stole $42,000 from this resort. I want her removed, arrested, and I want every one of you to see exactly what happens to thieves in my hotel." Nathan Brooks said those words like a man who had never once been wrong about anything in his entire life. And Emily Carter, wrist-bound, mouth gagged, being dragged across the marble floor of the Silver Canyon Resort, while cell phones recorded every second, could not say a single word to defend herself. But she didn't need words. She only needed one man to remember a promise. If this story moves you, hit subscribe right now and drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The morning of October 14th started exactly the way Emily Carter had planned it, carefully, quietly, and with absolute precision. She had been awake since 4 in the morning, not because she couldn't sleep, but because she had too much to do. Her mother's third chemotherapy appointment was scheduled for the following Tuesday. The copay alone was going to be $940, and Emily had already moved money from her personal savings twice this month just to keep the household above water. She had packed her lunch the night before, a ham sandwich and an apple, the same thing she ate almost every day, because $11 for the resort restaurant's lunch special was $11 she couldn't afford to spend. She arrived at the Silver Canyon Resort at 6:45 in the morning, 15 minutes before her shift officially began. That was just who Emily Carter was. Early, prepared, careful. She said good morning to Darnell at the front security desk, who waved without looking up from his coffee. She took the employee elevator to the 3rd floor, unlocked her office, set down her bag, and opened her accounting software the same way she had done every single morning for the past 3 years. What she did not know, what she could not possibly have known, was that somewhere in this building a trap had already been sprung, and her name was stamped on the trigger. The Silver Canyon Resort was not just a hotel, it was an institution. Nestled in the high desert of northern Arizona, it had hosted governor, celebrities, corporate retreats worth millions of dollars, and for the past 11 years, it had been run by a man named Nathan Brooks. Nathan was 44 years old, tall, silver-haired in a way that made him look distinguished rather than old, and he had a handshake that people remembered. He was the kind of man who knew every employee by first name, who sent handwritten birthday cards to regular guests, who had received 3 consecutive humanitarian awards from the Arizona Hospitality Association. There was a framed photo of Nathan shaking hands with the former state governor hanging in the executive hallway. People in Scottsdale did not just respect Nathan Brooks. They admired him, which is exactly why what he had built over the past 8 months was so difficult to see coming. Emily had found the first irregularity 4 months ago. It was a Tuesday afternoon in June, and she was running a standard quarterly reconciliation, the kind of routine audit that was part of her job description, the kind that most accountants treated as background noise. She had been halfway through a column of vendor payments when something made her stop. A transfer. $4,700, dated March 3rd, logged under a vendor code she didn't recognize. She pulled up the vendor file. The company listed was called Desert Southwest Administrative Services. She searched the system for a corresponding contract, a service agreement, a delivery record, anything that would explain why the resort had paid nearly $5,000 to a company she had never seen referenced in 3 years of financial records. There was nothing. She flagged it, internally made a note in her personal ledger, and moved on. She told herself it was probably an error, a misfiled invoice. Someone in purchasing entered the wrong code. But then she found another one, and another. And by the time she finished the quarterly report, she had identified 7 separate transfers totaling just over $31,000, all to vendor codes that either didn't exist in the system or led to entities she couldn't verify. Emily Carter sat at her desk for a long time that afternoon. She was not a dramatic person. She was not someone who jumped to conclusions. She was an accountant. She believed in what the numbers said, and right now the numbers were saying something that made her stomach go cold. She did not say anything to anyone, not yet. She just made copies of everything she'd found, saved them to a personal flash drive she kept in her desk drawer, and went home. 3 days later, she made the mistake of asking Nathan Brooks directly. She had chosen her words carefully. She had rehearsed the conversation the night before, lying in bed while her mother slept down the hall. She had told herself to stay calm, stay professional, and ask only what was necessary. She knocked on Nathan's office door at 2 in the afternoon on a Thursday. "Come in," he said. She stepped inside. Nathan was at his desk jacket off reading glasses on reviewing what looked like a catering proposal. He looked up and smiled the warm, attentive smile that had made him famous in this building. "Emily, what can I do for you?" She sat down across from him. She folded her hands in her lap because they had started to tremble slightly, which annoyed her. "I was doing the quarterly reconciliation last week," and she said, "and I came across some vendor entries I wasn't able to match to contracts." Nathan took his glasses off slowly. "What kind of entries?" "Transfers, several of them, going back about 6 months." She slid a single printed page across the desk, a summary she had prepared. Nothing that revealed how much she already knew, just enough to ask the question. "I flagged them for follow-up, but I wanted to check with you before I escalated, in case there was something I was missing." Nathan looked at the paper. He did not reach for it. He looked at it from exactly where it lay, and then he looked back at Emily, and his expression had not changed at all. That was the moment Emily felt the first real wave of fear, not because he looked angry, but because he looked completely, absolutely calm. "I appreciate you bringing this to me," he said. His voice was even warm, almost gentle. "These are related to some consulting arrangements I've been managing at the executive level. They're outside your scope, but I understand the confusion. I'll have the documentation routed to your department so everything reconciles properly." Emily nodded. "Okay, thank you." She stood up, picked up her summary sheet from the desk, and walked to the door. "Emily," Nathan said behind her. She turned. "These things can look complicated from the outside," he said, and now his eyes were very still. "That's why it's important to ask questions before drawing conclusions. Wouldn't you agree?" She held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. "Absolutely," she said. She walked back to her office, closed the door, and sat very quietly at her desk. She had just been warned. The documentation Nathan had promised never arrived. What arrived instead 2 days later was a formal meeting invitation from HR titled Performance Review Follow-Up Discussion. Emily had never received a performance review outside of her annual evaluation cycle. She sat down with Linda Marsh from Human Resources and found Nathan in the room as well, sitting to the side casual like he had just stopped in. The meeting lasted 35 minutes. By the end of it, Emily had been formally cited for 2 instances of unauthorized system access, meaning the searches she had run to investigate the vendor codes, and given a written warning that had already been placed in her personnel file. She drove home that night feeling like the walls were moving closer. She sat at her kitchen table and opened her laptop and stared at the flash drive. $31,000, 7 transactions, no documentation, and now a written warning in her file, and a general manager who had just demonstrated very calmly that he knew exactly how to make someone's questions disappear. Her mother came into the kitchen at 10 o'clock for a glass of water. Margaret Carter was 59 years old, thin, in a way that made Emily's chest ache every time she saw her, and that night she was moving slowly because the last round of treatment had been hard. "You're still up," her mother said. "Just finishing some work." Margaret poured her water. She looked at Emily for a moment. "You have your father's face right now," she said quietly. "That look he got when he was working something out." Emily closed the laptop. "I'm fine, Mom. Your father always says that too." Margaret kissed the top of her head. "Don't work too late." Emily sat alone in the kitchen for a long time after her mother went back to bed, and she made a decision. To him, she was not going to walk away. She had seen what Nathan was doing. She had the evidence, or at least the beginning of it, and every instinct she had, every principle her father had ever drilled into her about what it meant to do the right thing, even when it was expensive, was telling her that walking away was not something she was going to be able to live with. But she was also not going to be naive. She understood now that Nathan was not just her boss. He was a man with resources, relationships, and a very long head start. If she was going to do this, she had to be smart. She had to be patient. She had to build something that couldn't be taken away from her. Over the following 3 months, Emily Carter became very, very careful. She continued doing her job exactly as she always had. She kept her head down. She smiled when she passed Nathan in the hallway, and he smiled back, and neither of them acknowledged the conversation that had happened in his office. She stopped using the resort systems for anything related to her investigation. She worked from home. She worked on personal devices. She worked slowly and methodically, the way her father had once taught her to navigate anything dangerous. Slow is smooth, Em. Smooth is fast. You don't rush toward a rescue in bad water. You plan it first. She filed an initial complaint with the resort's corporate parent company through their anonymous ethics hotline. She didn't identify herself. She laid out what she had found, summarized the discrepancies, and requested a formal financial audit. She was told the complaint had been received and that the matter would be reviewed. She saved a copy of that confirmation email. She continued building her file. Every week she found new transactions. The total climbed from 31,000 to 48,000 to 62,000. She documented the vendor codes, cross-referenced state business registration databases, and discovered that several of the entities receiving payments were shells, companies registered at addresses that turned out to be vacant lots, or post office boxes. She compiled everything into a master document. She saved copies on 2 separate flash drives, emailed encrypted versions to a private account she had created specifically for this purpose, and arranged for a physical backup to be automatically mailed on a specific date to the corporate investigators who had received her initial complaint. She told no one. She went to work every day. She made her mother's appointments. She ate her ham sandwich at her desk. She smiled at Nathan in the hallway, and she waited. What Emily Carter did not know, what she had no way of knowing, was that Nathan had not stopped watching her. He had been watching her since that Thursday afternoon when she sat across from him and slid that piece of paper across his desk. He had recognized something in her expression that worried him. Not panic, not anger, but the particular kind of steadiness that belonged to someone who was not going to be easily managed. He had made some quiet inquiries. He knew about her mother's illness. He knew about the medical bills. He knew exactly how much Emily Carter needed this job. And when his initial efforts to contain the situation, the written warning, the HR citation, had not produced the fear response he expected, he had escalated. Nathan Brooks began planning a second operation. This one was not about hiding money. This one was about destruction. He selected the date carefully. He had known for months that a charity delegation from the Hells Angels was scheduled to arrive at the Silver Canyon Resort on October 14th for a prearranged fundraising event. He had arranged the booking himself, the resort's conference rooms, the catering, the whole package. He had done it publicly and warmly because the kind of man Nathan appeared to be was exactly the kind of man who welcomed everyone. The Hells Angels' arrival would guarantee a lobby full of people, cell phones, witnesses, spectators, the kind of crowd that would watch something happen and form conclusions before anyone had asked a single question. He withdrew $42,000 in cash from the resort's executive vault on the evening of October 13th. He documented the withdrawal in his own name, then spent the next 2 hours carefully rewriting the paper trail to point directly at Emily Carter, her access credentials, a falsified authorization form bearing what appeared to be her signature, a log entry placing her in the executive vault area at a time she had actually been in a meeting with 3 other people. He called the company responsible for managing the security camera system and reported a technical maintenance issue that required the vault corridor cameras to be taken offline for calibration. He placed the cash in a location where it could be found. He set the time of discovery for 10:30 the following morning. He went home, changed into his weekend clothes, and attended a neighbor's dinner party that evening. He brought wine. He laughed at people's jokes. He stayed until 11. Emily arrived at 6:45 the next morning. At 7:15, she was at her desk running payroll verification. At 8:50, Nathan arrived. He stopped at the front desk to compliment Darnell on a new photo of Darnell's grandson that was taped to the monitor. He took the elevator to the executive floor. He spoke with 2 department heads about weekend occupancy numbers. At 9:43, he made a phone call. At 10:22, members of the resort's security team knocked on Emily Carter's office door. She looked up from her screen. "Ms. Carter," one of them said, "we need you to come with us." She felt something drop in her stomach. Not surprise exactly. More like the arrival of something she had known was coming and had hoped despite everything might not. "What's this about?" she said. Her voice was steady. "We need to speak with you downstairs." She stood up. She left her computer running. She did not close the windows or lock the screen because she wanted everything exactly where it was. She picked up nothing. She put nothing in her pockets. She walked out of her office between the 2 security officers. In the elevator, she looked straight ahead. She was already thinking. The lobby of the Silver Canyon Resort was one of the most beautiful spaces in northern Arizona. Soaring ceilings, polished travertine floors, enormous windows that opened onto views of the desert canyon. On a busy morning, it held hundreds of people, guests checking in, staff moving through their duties, visitors waiting in the lounge area. On the morning of October 14th, it was more crowded than usual. There was a maintenance crew near the far entrance, a wedding party loading luggage near the valet station, and just arriving through the main entrance, 19 motorcycles in precise formation, the riders dismounting with the particular economy of movement that belonged to men who had been doing this for a very long time. Emily did not see any of this immediately. She emerged from the elevator with a security officer on each side, and in the moment between the elevator opening and her brain processing what was happening, Nathan Brooks was already there. I was standing in the center of the lobby, which was not his normal position. He had positioned himself where he could be seen from every angle, and around him stood the resort's head of security, two additional officers, and what appeared to be a sheriff's deputy, though Emily would later learn that the deputy was a personal friend of Nathan's, who had been called ahead of any formal report. Nathan looked at Emily the way a disappointed parent looks at a child who has done something beyond redemption. "Emily," he said, and his voice carried. He made sure it carried. "I think we both know why we're here." The lobby noise began to fade. Heads turned. "I have to inform everyone present," Nathan continued, and now he was addressing the room, not just Emily, "that we have discovered a significant theft from this resort. $42,000. Missing from the executive vault. And the evidence points directly to this employee." Emily heard someone gasp. She heard a phone camera click. She felt a cold ring of metal close around her left wrist. "What are you doing?" she said, and her voice came out quieter than she intended. "You can't. I didn't take anything." "The evidence says otherwise," Nathan said. "What evidence? What are you even—" The second cuff closed. Her hands were behind her back. Nathan, look at me. You know what's really happening here. You know what I found. You can't do this." "We'll let the sheriff determine what's real," Nathan said. He looked at the security team. "Make sure she doesn't go anywhere." And this was the detail that would be discussed for months afterward, one of the security officers produced a cloth and gagged her. Emily Carter stood in the center of the most beautiful lobby in northern Arizona, hands bound, mouth covered, surrounded by a crowd of people who were watching and filming and already deciding what they believed. She had planned for many things. She had not planned for this. She had not planned for the gang. She had not planned for the specific and absolute silencing of her voice. She had 3 seconds, maybe 5, before the shock fully set in and the panic rose. And then she heard it, the sound she had not registered in the chaos of the past 4 minutes. Engines cutting off, boots on pavement, 19 men walking through the main entrance. Emily turned her head, amok. And in the middle of the Hells Angels delegation, moving with the unhurried authority of someone who had learned very young that speed was not the same as power, was a man she had never seen before in her life. He was in his mid-50s, gray beard cut short, a red bandana folded once and tied at his wrist, a leather vest with a patch that read President. I was scanning the room the way experienced people scan unfamiliar spaces, not with alarm, but with the quiet professional attention of someone who has spent decades learning the difference between situations that are what they appear to be and situations that are something else entirely. His eyes found Emily. She had one chance. She did not know this man. She did not know his name. She did not know anything about him except what her body suddenly inexplicably recognized: the way he was standing, the way he was watching, the particular quality of his attention that was not the attention of a bystander. It was the attention of someone who had seen real trouble before, who knew what it looked like when something was wrong in the specific way that things are wrong when someone is in danger but cannot say so. Emily Carter looked directly at Walt Holloway. She nodded slowly, once, twice, 3 times. She held his gaze, and then she closed her eyes, slowly, deliberately. 1, 2, 3. Walt Holloway stopped walking. The man beside him said something. Walt did not respond. He was standing completely still in the middle of the Silver Canyon Resort lobby, and something had happened to his expression that the people around him could not interpret. Not quite recognition, not quite memory, but something between the two. Something that was working through him, the way cold water moves through a person when they step into it unexpectedly. He remembered. He remembered a boat in a storm. He remembered a Coast Guard captain who had reached him when reaching him should not have been possible, who had put his own body between Walt Holloway and the ocean and refused to let go. He remembered the weeks afterward, the recovery, the visits, the conversations that had stretched past midnight in a hospital room in Seattle. He remembered a man named Jack Carter sitting across from him and saying very quietly and very seriously, "I'm going to teach you something that might save your life someday, or it might save someone else's." You remember it. 3 slow nods, 3 slow blinks. It means I cannot speak. I need help. Don't react, just respond. Walt had laughed a little. He had said, "You turning me into a spy captain." And Jack Carter had looked at him with eyes that were completely serious and said, "I'm turning you into someone who pays attention." That was 19 years ago. Walt Holloway looked at the bound woman in the lobby of the Silver Canyon Resort, and he paid attention. He did not shout. He did not surge forward. He did not do anything that looked like a reaction. He turned to the man beside him, his vice president, a man named Ray, and said 2 sentences so quietly that no one 3 feet away could hear them. Then he walked toward the front desk with the measured pace of a man who was simply checking in for his meeting. And the trap that Nathan Brooks had spent 8 months building began very slowly to crack. Nathan had not expected the Hells Angels to be a complication. He had in fact chosen this day partly because of them. A lobby full of intimidating-looking outsiders, cell phone cameras, and public chaos. All of it would ensure that the visual story of Emily Carter being removed from his resort would travel far and wide before anyone had time to ask questions. By the time corporate investigators arrived, the narrative would already be set: dishonest employee, trusted manager, clear evidence, public removal. What he had not calculated was that one of the men arriving in that lobby had once been pulled from a sinking vessel by Emily Carter's father, had sat in a hospital bed and been taught a signal that was never meant for crowds, and that it would be used 19 years later in a hotel lobby in Arizona on the worst morning of Emily Carter's life. Walt reached the front desk. He spoke to the clerk, a young woman named Jessie, who looked terrified and was clearly trying to pretend she was somewhere else. He asked a simple question about the conference room reservation. Jessie pulled up the booking. Walt said thank you. Then he turned and looked at the scene playing out 20 feet behind him and said at full volume but with the complete calmness of a man ordering breakfast, "Excuse me, I have a question." Nathan turned. The lobby went quieter than it had been all morning. Walt Holloway was not a physically frightening man in the traditional sense. He was of average height, he was in his mid-50s, he moved deliberately and without aggression. But there was something about the quality of the silence he brought with him when he spoke that had a way of making everyone in a room understand that this was not a person who asked questions he didn't already partly know the answers to. "That woman," Walt said, nodding toward Emily. "She's been gagged and tied. Is she under arrest?" Nathan took a breath. "She's being held pending the sheriff's arrival." "The sheriff," Walt said. "Okay, has the sheriff been called?" "A report has been filed." "That's not what I asked." There was a pause. Nathan smiled, the controlled, patient smile he used when he was repositioning. "The proper authorities are being contacted. This is a private matter within our resort, and we appreciate your understanding." "What did she steal?" Walt said. $42,000 from the executive vault. When the discovery was made this morning. When was it stolen? Nathan paused, just briefly, just long enough for someone who was watching carefully to notice. "We believe between yesterday evening and early this morning." "She got here at 6:45 this morning," said a voice from behind the front desk. Everyone turned. It was Jessie, 23 years old, visibly shaking but looking directly at Nathan with the expression of someone who has decided to do something terrifying. "I check the employee access log every morning because it's my job. Emily swiped in at 6:45. She's always early." Nathan said, "Jessie." "I'm just answering the question," Jessie said. Her voice shook, but she did not look away. Walt nodded once, like someone receiving information that fit a picture he was already building. "Vault access requires special credentials," he said. "Yes," said a man from across the lobby, older, heavyset, a resort maintenance uniform. He had not planned to speak, but something had shifted in the room, some invisible permission granted by the fact that one person had already spoken. "Vault corridor. There's a separate key card for that wing. Not everyone has it." "Who has it?" Walt said. Nathan said, "That's proprietary security." I'm just asking, Walt said pleasantly. The lobby was completely still. Somewhere in that stillness, Emily Carter was standing with her hands bound and her mouth covered, and she was watching Walt Holloway take apart Nathan Brooks's perfect morning with nothing but questions, and she was crying. She could not have explained to anyone afterward exactly why she was crying, whether it was fear or relief, or the particular unbearable emotion that arrives when you have been carrying something alone for so long that the moment someone else reaches for it, your entire body breaks open. But she was crying and her eyes were on Walt, and Walt was still asking questions. Why is she gagged? Walt said. Nathan said, for the safety of... She's a 5'4" accountant with her hands behind her back, Walt said. What exactly is the safety concern? Someone in the crowd laughed, a single involuntary sound, and then caught it and went quiet. But it had happened. Nathan's face tightened just slightly. The cameras, said another voice. Nathan turned toward the sound. A young man in a resort security uniform was standing near the elevator bank. He was maybe 26 with the particular look of someone who has been waiting for a specific moment and has not decided yet whether to enter it or retreat. The cameras in the vault corridor, the young man said. They were offline this morning. I was told to take them down last night for scheduled calibration. But there is no scheduled calibration. I checked. There's nothing on the maintenance calendar. He swallowed. I was told by management. The word management sat in the lobby air for a full 4 seconds. Nathan Brooks turned to look at the young man. And for the first time that morning, for the first time perhaps in a very long time, Nathan Brooks's composure showed something other than composure. It was just a flicker, a tightening around the eyes, the nearly imperceptible shift of a man who has been standing in a place he believed was solid and has just felt the ground move beneath his feet. Walt Holloway saw it, so did Emily Carter. So did Jesse behind the front desk and the maintenance worker, by the elevator and the 20 or 30 guests who had stopped pretending they weren't watching. And in the pocket of Walt Holloway's vest, his phone was quietly recording everything. Nathan moved to reassert control. I want to be very clear, he said, and he turned to address the lobby rather than any individual, a technique that had served him well for years. What is happening here is a personnel matter involving a theft investigation. I understand that the way this looks is upsetting to some people, but this woman is a suspect in a criminal investigation and the proper authorities will call them, Walt said. Nathan turned. The proper authorities, Walt said. Call them right now on your phone, in front of everyone, because I've been standing here for 7 minutes and I haven't seen anyone make that call. And if she really did what you say she did, you should want that call made more than anyone in this room. The lobby went so quiet that someone in the back could be heard whispering to the person beside them. Nathan reached into his pocket. He produced his phone. He made a show of dialing. He lifted the phone to his ear. And Walt Holloway watched him very carefully, because Walt had spent a lot of years reading people. And what he saw was not a man calling the police about a theft. What he saw was a man performing the act of calling the police about a theft. There is a difference. It is subtle. But it is there in the particular quality of the stillness that surrounds a person who is playing a role versus a person who is doing a thing. Walt turned to Ray behind him and said 3 words. Ray pulled out his own phone and made a call. That call was to a man named Dennis Ortega, a former colleague of Walt's who had spent 22 years with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office before retiring. Dennis still had relationships. Dennis still made calls. And Dennis, when he heard what was happening at the Silver Canyon Resort, said, "Give me 12 minutes." In those 12 minutes, 3 more things happened. The first was that a woman named Patricia Huang, the head of housekeeping, a 53-year-old woman who had worked at the Silver Canyon Resort for 14 years, walked out of the service corridor and across the lobby and stood beside Emily Carter. She did not touch Emily. She did not say anything to Nathan. She simply stood beside the bound, gagged woman in the center of the room and looked at the lobby as if to say, I am here. I am witnessing this, and I am not going anywhere. Patricia Huang had 3 years until retirement. She had a mortgage and 2 kids in college. Everyone who knew her would have said she was not the type to do something like this. She had watched Emily Carter arrive early every single morning for 3 years. She had seen the look on Emily's face after the HR meeting with Nathan. She had noticed things she had told herself were not her business. Standing beside Emily Carter right now was the most frightening thing Patricia Huang had done since the day she had left her first marriage with nothing but her kids in her suitcases. But she did not move. The second thing that happened was that a man named David Lin, who was the resort's assistant controller and had worked alongside Emily for 2 years, came downstairs from the accounting department with a folder in his hands. He walked to the front of the crowd. He opened the folder. He held up a single sheet of paper. "This is a system-generated vault access log," David said. His voice was controlled, deliberate, the voice of a man reciting facts. "It shows every access event for the executive vault wing for the past 72 hours. Emily Carter's credentials are not on this log. Her keycard ID does not appear at any point during the window in which the theft allegedly occurred." He looked at Nathan. "But another credential does appear. Twice. Once at 9:47 p.m. yesterday. Once at 11:12 p.m. The room was absolutely still. "Whose credential?" said Walt Holloway. David Lynn looked at the paper. He looked at Nathan. He looked at the paper again. "The executive override credential," David said, "which is single access, meaning it belongs to one person." The third thing that happened was that two vehicles pulled into the resort's front drive. One was a Maricopa County Sheriff's vehicle. The other was an unmarked sedan from which two men emerged carrying bags and laptops, men who had been driving from Phoenix since early that morning because they had received an encrypted evidence package in the mail 4 days ago and had been waiting to act on it. Corporate investigators. Emily had sent her evidence package on a scheduled trigger. It had arrived. They were here. And Nathan Brooks stood in the center of his lobby and watched everything he had built with meticulous care over 8 months walk toward him in the form of two men in suits and one sheriff in a folder in the hands of his assistant controller and a former Coast Guard captain's daughter who was still standing with her hands bound and her mouth gagged. But now she was smiling. Not triumphant, not vindictive, just the particular quiet, almost exhausted smile of someone who has been carrying a very heavy thing alone for a very long time and can feel someone else's hands finally taking some of the weight. Walt Holloway crossed the lobby to the sheriff before Nathan could reach him. "Got here fast," Walt said. "Got an interesting call," the sheriff said. He looked at Emily, he looked at Nathan, he looked at the folder in David Lynn's hands, and the crowd of employees who were still very quietly not leaving. "Somebody want to tell me what's going on here?" And in the lobby of the Silver Canyon Resort on the morning of October 14th, the answer to that question began to unravel everything. Nathan tried one more time. "Sheriff," he said, stepping forward with his hand extended and his most authoritative expression in place. "I'm glad you're here. This has been a difficult morning and we've been trying to manage a very sensitive situation. We have an employee who—" "I'll hear from her first," the sheriff said, without taking Nathan's hand. He nodded toward Emily. The security officer who was standing beside Emily looked at Nathan. Nathan said nothing. The officer hesitated for precisely 3 seconds and then uncuffed Emily's wrists and removed the gag. Emily Carter took a breath. She rubbed her wrists. She looked at the sheriff. She looked at Walt Holloway. She looked at Patricia Huang standing beside her, still steady, still present. And she said calmly and clearly, and with the particular precision of someone who has been waiting for this exact moment, "My name is Emily Carter. I'm the senior accounting clerk for this resort. For the past 4 months, I have been compiling evidence of systematic embezzlement by Nathan Brooks, over $62,000 diverted to shell companies over an 8-month period. I filed a complaint with corporate ethics 93 days ago. I mailed a comprehensive evidence package to the corporate audit team 4 days ago, and I have never at any point accessed the executive vault." She looked at Nathan. "He framed me," she said, "and I can prove it." The lobby did not erupt. It did not fill with noise or commotion. Instead, it did the thing that crowds do in the specific moment when a truth that everyone has half-sensed is finally said out loud in plain language. It went completely, absolutely quiet. And in that quiet, Walt Holloway stood at the back of the crowd with his arms crossed and looked at the woman who had given him 3 slow nods and 3 slow blinks across a chaotic lobby. And he thought about her father and about a promise made in a hospital room in Seattle 19 years ago, and about all the things that survive in the world when people take the time to teach them. The sheriff turned to the corporate investigators. "You got the evidence package," he said. "We do," one of them said. "Nathan Brooks," the sheriff said, turning. Nathan Brooks was still standing in his lobby. His jacket was still perfect. His hair was still exactly as it had been when he arrived this morning. He was the most well-composed man in the room, but his hands, Emily noticed. His hands were shaking. "I'd like you to come with me," the sheriff said. And the lobby of the Silver Canyon Resort watched Nathan Brooks walk toward the door between two uniformed officers, and one by one the cell phones that had been recording Emily's humiliation turned and followed him instead. Somewhere across the room, a maintenance worker started clapping. Then someone else. Then Patricia Huang. Then David Lin. The sound built slowly. The way honest things do, not all at once, not with fanfare, but one person at a time, each one deciding independently, until the sound filled the soaring ceiling of the most beautiful lobby in northern Arizona. Emily Carter stood in the center of it all and looked at her hands. Free. Walt Holloway walked across the lobby to where she was standing. He stopped in front of her. He was quiet for a moment. "Your father was a good man," he said. Emily looked up. "I used to say that the bravest thing a person can do," Walt said, "is ask for help when asking is the hardest thing in the world." He held out his hand. Emily shook it. And the morning of October 14th, which had begun as the worst morning of her life, became something else entirely. The truth does not always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it arrives on 19 motorcycles. Sometimes it arrives in the steady hands of a woman who has been silenced and chooses anyway to find a way to speak. Sometimes it arrives in the memory of a promise made between two men in a hospital room, a promise so specific and so carefully taught that it survived decades and storms and the ordinary erosion of time. Sometimes the most powerful thing in the world is three slow blinks, and the one person in the room who knows how to watch for them. The sheriff's car was still in the driveway when Emily finally sat down. Not in a chair exactly, she half collapsed onto the edge of a bench near the front desk, and Patricia Huang sat beside her without being asked, and neither of them said anything for almost a full minute. The lobby had not returned to normal. It never would, not really. The staff moved through it differently now, carefully, like people walking through a room where something heavy had fallen and left a mark in the floor. Emily's wrists were red where the cuffs had been. She kept rubbing them without realizing she was doing it. David Lin crouched in front of her and set a bottle of water on the bench beside her knee. "You should drink something," he said. She looked at him. "How long did you know?" He did not look away. "Long enough that I'm ashamed I didn't say something sooner." That was all he said. It was enough. Walt Holloway was across the lobby, speaking quietly with the two corporate investigators. She could not hear the words, but she watched the way the investigators were listening to him, leaning in slightly the way people do when the person speaking is telling them something that is reorganizing their understanding of events. Walt's hands moved when he talked, controlled and deliberate, like a man who had spent decades in rooms where precision mattered. Emily watched him and thought about her father, and then she stopped thinking about her father, because if she kept going in that direction, she was going to come completely apart in front of everyone, and she was not going to do that. Not yet. She drank the water. The sheriff came back inside. He was a heavy-set man in his late 40s, Sheriff Randall Cook, and he had the particular look of someone who had arrived expecting a straightforward situation and found something considerably more complicated. He sat down across from Emily, not official, not interrogating, just sitting, and he looked at her for a moment. "Ms. Carter," he said, "I need to understand something before we go any further." "Okay," she said. "You said you've been building a case for 4 months." "Yes." "And you said you mailed an evidence package 4 days ago to the corporate audit team, scheduled trigger. I set it up so that if I didn't cancel the shipment by a specific date, it would mail automatically." Cook was quiet for a second. "Why a dead man's switch?" Emily looked at him steadily. "Because I didn't know what was going to happen to me." The sheriff absorbed that. "Smart," he said finally, and she could tell he meant it. "My father was a Coast Guard officer," she said. "He always said that when you're going into bad water, you plan your exit before you plan your entry." Cook glanced at Walt Holloway across the room, and something in his expression shifted, a piece connecting to another piece. He looked back at Emily. "The man with the motorcycles," he said. "He knew your father." "He did," Emily said. "I didn't know that until today." "How did you know to signal him?" Emily thought about that for a moment. She looked down at her hands. "I didn't exactly," she said. "I knew the signal. My father taught it to me when I was 16. He said someday, somewhere, there would be someone who recognized it." She paused. "I didn't know if it would work. I had nothing else." Sheriff Cook was quiet for a long moment. "All right," he said. He stood up. I'm going to need your full statement. Everything you found, everything you documented, every date and amount. Can you do that? I can do that, Emily said. Then let's start from the beginning. And so in the lobby of the Silver Canyon Resort, while Nathan Brooks sat in the back of a county vehicle in the parking lot outside Emily Carter and told the truth from the very beginning. And the beginning, she explained, was a Tuesday afternoon in June and a transfer and a vendor code that didn't match anything in 3 years of records. And then the next one, and the next one. And the whole story came out not all at once, and not easily, but steadily, the way water moves when the thing holding it back is finally removed. It moved the way the truth usually moves once it gets started. Fast and unstoppable and impossible to put back. 8 months earlier, Nathan Brooks had been a man with a problem. The problem was not at its core a financial one. That was how it looked from the outside, but money was never really what it was about for Nathan. What it was about, what it had always been about, for as long as he could remember, was control. Nathan had grown up in a family that had none. His father had been a charismatic, charming disaster of a human being. The kind of man who could walk into a room and make everyone in it feel important and then walk out with their wallet and their dignity and leave them standing there trying to figure out what had just happened. Nathan had watched his mother give everything she had to that man, her time, her trust, her savings, her self-respect, and receive absolutely nothing in return. What Nathan had decided very early was that he would never be on the losing end of anything. Han had built his career with the same meticulous care that other people reserved for surgical procedures. Every position he took strategically. Every relationship he cultivated was an investment. He was not cynical about this, or rather he had spent so many years not being cynical about it that the distinction had become genuinely invisible to him. He believed by the time he arrived at the Silver Canyon Resort that he was simply a very good manager who understood how the world worked. What he had not understood, what no one had been able to teach him, because some lessons require very specific conditions, was that there is a difference between managing a system and having the right to benefit from it. The first transfer had happened almost accidentally. A vendor dispute, a delayed invoice, a gap in the accounting cycle that created a window where a payment could be rerouted without triggering an immediate flag. Nathan had seen the window and stepped through it without in that first moment fully intending to. It was $4,000. He had told himself he would fix it within the quarter. He did not fix it. Instead, he did what people who have crossed a certain kind of line often do. He stepped through a second window because the first one hadn't closed, and then a third because the second one hadn't either. He told himself the numbers were manageable. He told himself he had a plan. He told himself that what he was doing was technically complicated in ways that ordinary people like the clerks in the accounting department, would never understand well enough to unravel. I had not counted on Emily Carter. She was not, from Nathan's perspective, a particularly threatening figure. She was 28. She had been with the resort for 3 years. She was pleasant and professional and quiet. She came to work early. She went home. She took care of her mother. He had noticed that she ate lunch at her desk and that she drove a car that was several years old and that she never attended the staff holiday events that involved cover charges, which told him something about her financial situation that he filed away the way he filed everything in case it became useful. While he had underestimated her, that was ultimately the mistake that undid everything. Not the transfers, not the shell companies, not the falsified documentation. The mistake was the moment he sat across from Emily Carter and saw the paper she had slid across his desk and recognized with the particular acuity of a man whose survival instincts were extraordinarily well developed that he was looking at someone who was not going to be frightened away. She had not argued with him. She had not threatened him. She had sat across from him with her hands folded in her lap and said the documentation would be helpful, with the absolute flatness of someone who already knew the documentation would not be coming. And then she had left, and Nathan had sat in his office for the rest of that afternoon and understood that his careful and visible operation had been seen by someone who was not going to unsee it. He had tried the professional route first, the HR warning, the unauthorized access citation. He had done it with regret. Genuinely, he did not dislike Emily personally, which made this more inconvenient, not less. He had hoped the warning would be enough to shut her down to make her weigh the cost of continuing against the cost of her mother's medical bills and her old car and her lunch that she packed every morning because $11 was too much to spend. He had been wrong. He knew he was wrong when 3 weeks after the HR meeting, he had a quiet conversation with his contact in the corporate IT security department, a man named Torres who owed Nathan several significant favors, and Torres told him that someone had been accessing state business registration databases from an outside connection, cross-referencing entities against the resort's vendor payment records. Nathan had sat with that information for 2 days. Then he had made the decision that changed everything. He would not try to silence Emily Carter. Silencing her, meaning discrediting her, marginalized her, wearing her down until she gave up, was too slow, and she had already demonstrated that she was not easily worn down. What he needed was something faster and more definitive, something that didn't just stop her from talking, but made anything she said impossible to believe. He needed her to be the criminal. The architecture of it had taken him 6 weeks. He was meticulous about it the way he was meticulous about everything. He mapped out every element, the cash withdrawal, the paper trail, the planted evidence, the disabled cameras, the manipulated access logs. He chose the witnesses he would need and the employees who would be controllable. He selected the date based on the Hells Angels reservation, not because he feared them, but because their presence guaranteed a crowd, and a crowd guaranteed an audience. And an audience guaranteed that the story of Emily Carter being removed from the Silver Canyon Resort in handcuffs would be the story that spread not any story she might try to tell afterward. He had done all of this with a clear conscience because the alternative, allowing Emily Carter to expose what he had done, was something his mind simply would not accept as a possible outcome. He had built something here. He had spent 11 years making this resort what it was. He had given speeches about integrity and community at events across this county. He had a photograph shaking hands with the governor. He had a humanitarian award. He had built a version of himself that was real, that was genuine, that he genuinely believed in. And Emily Carter was not going to take it from him. That was what he had told himself on the morning of October 14th, standing in his kitchen, drinking his coffee, reading the news on his phone. That was what he had told himself when he arrived at the resort at 8:50 and stopped at the front desk to compliment Darnell on the photo of his grandson. That was what he had told himself at 9:43 when he made the phone call that sent 2 security officers upstairs to Emily's office. He had been so certain. The certainty had begun to erode at the precise moment Walt Holloway asked his first question. Nathan had not known Walt Holloway was going to be anything other than a scenic complication, a group of bikers checking in for their meeting, standing at the edges of the scene he had carefully arranged. He had watched Walt cross the lobby to the front desk and assumed he was there to complain about the disruption to his reservation. When Walt turned and asked why Emily was gagged, Nathan had still not been concerned. He had managed difficult guests before. He managed them by staying warm, staying reasonable, staying in the position of the calm, authoritative adult in the room while making the other person feel that their concerns were being heard, even as they were being efficiently redirected. It took him 4 exchanges with Walt Holloway to understand that this was not going to work. It was not anything Walt said that tipped him off. It was the quality of Walt's listening. Most people, when they ask a question in a confrontational situation, are listening for the answer while simultaneously formulating their next argument. Walt was doing something different. Walt was listening the way a man listens when he already knows something and is waiting to find out how much of it the other person is going to confirm. Nathan had met very few people in his life who listened like that. He recognized it because his father had listened like that. The memory arrived without warning, sharp and unwelcome, and Nathan pushed it aside and tried to regain the frame of the conversation. But the frame was already tilting because Jesse had spoken from behind the front desk, and the maintenance worker had spoken, and then the security technician, Marcus Webb, 26 years old, who had been told to take the cameras offline and had done it without asking why, because he needed this job, had taken a step forward and said the thing about the maintenance calendar. Nathan had looked at Marcus Webb standing near the elevator bank, and Marcus Webb had looked back at him, and there had been a very long second in which Nathan understood that the thing he had spent 6 weeks building had a crack in it. The crack was human. He had planned for everything except the fundamental unreliability of people who, when placed in a room full of other people and asked to stay silent, find that silence heavier than they expected. Jesse had not planned to speak. Marcus had not planned to speak. David Lynn, with his vault access log, had not planned to create an evidentiary document and walk it downstairs and hold it up in front of 60 witnesses. Patricia Huang had not planned to stand beside a bound woman in the middle of a lobby and simply refuse to leave. But that is what happens when the architecture of a lie begins to shift. The load-bearing walls start to speak. By the time the sheriff's vehicle pulled in and the corporate investigators climbed out of the unmarked sedan, Nathan had already known somewhere underneath the performance of his composure that the morning was over. He had tried once more, the hand extended toward the sheriff, the warm, authoritative voice. "I'm glad you're here." The sheriff had not taken his hand, and Nathan Brooks had felt for the first time in a very long time the particular and clarifying sensation of being someone who no longer controls what is happening. He had sat in the back of the county vehicle and looked through the window at the resort he had run for 11 years, and he had felt he would not have been able to explain this to anyone, something very close to relief. Not at being caught, not at the situation, but at the ending of the performance. 11 years was a very long time to be the version of a person that everyone believed in. Walt Holloway gave his statement to the corporate investigators in one of the conference rooms that had been reserved for the charity fundraiser. The fundraiser did not happen that day. Nobody had canceled it formally. It had simply become impossible the way things become impossible when the event they were scheduled around has been entirely reorganized by reality. He sat at a conference table with the two investigators, a man named Farrell and a woman named Chen, and he told them what he had seen. He told it straight without embellishment, the way he told everything. He had been approaching the lobby entrance when he saw the crowd and slowed down. He had seen a woman with her hands bound and her mouth covered. He had seen the person speaking to the crowd, Nathan Brooks, whose name he did not know at that moment, but whose manner he had recognized immediately as the manner of a man performing a role rather than reporting a fact. He had asked questions. "Why'd you start asking questions?" Farrell said. Walt thought about it for a moment. "Because the setup was too clean," he said. "A gagged woman in a hotel lobby. Crowd already gathered. Management speaking first loudest, most confidently. Nobody else saying anything." He paused. "That's a stage, not a situation. Real situations are messy. When something's too clean, somebody arranged it." Chen looked at her notepad. "And the signal she gave you, you recognized it?" "Yes." "From her father. Jack Carter, Coast Guard Rescue, 2007, Seattle. We were out in a storm system that had no business putting boats in the water." Walt stopped for a moment. 19 years and the memory was still completely specific. The sound of it, the cold, the way Jack Carter's voice had been the steadiest thing in that entire situation. Jack had a saying. He said that the most dangerous moment in any rescue isn't when the person in trouble is screaming, it's when they've stopped. When they can't call out anymore and they're using everything they have just to stay above water. He said you have to learn to read the silence. Neither investigator said anything. Walt continued. Afterward in the hospital, he taught me the signal. He said he taught it to his family too. He said it was for moments when speaking wasn't safe. 3 nods, 3 slow blinks. He looked at the table for a moment. He died 3 years later. Heart attack. I went to the funeral, but I'd lost touch before that. It was a long time ago. "Until today," Chen said. "Until today." Walt agreed. Farrell leaned forward. "Mr. Holloway, I want to ask you something directly, and I want you to understand that your answer doesn't affect this investigation either way." "Go ahead," Walt said. "When you saw her signal, when you recognized it was there, any part of you that thought it might be a mistake, that she might be genuinely guilty and just signaling for help regardless?" Walt was quiet for a beat. "Yeah," he said, "that thought was there. And then I started asking questions," Walt said. "Because if she was guilty and I was wrong, the truth would come out in the answers. That's the thing about questions, they work either way." Farrell sat back. He and Chen exchanged a look. "Thank you, Mr. Holloway," Farrell said. Chen. Emily was still giving her statement when David Lynn came to find her. He knocked on the door frame of the small office where she was sitting with Sheriff Cook, and Cook nodded him in. David set down the folder on the table in front of Emily and opened it carefully like a man handling something fragile. "I pulled everything I could access," David said. "The vault access logs, the camera maintenance request, which is in Nathan's own email timestamped at 9:30 p.m. the night before, and this." He slid out a single page. This is the original vendor setup for Desert Southwest Administrative Services. Entered into the system 13 months ago. The user ID on the entry is Nathan's executive credential. Emily looked at the page. She had known all of this, or most of it. She had been building toward this document for months. Seeing it printed, official, dated, and sourced, and sitting on a table in front of a county sheriff was something different from knowing it existed. "How did you get this?" she said quietly. "I've been quietly pulling records for 3 weeks," David said. He sat down across from her. "Emily, I found something in the transfers that you didn't include in your corporate complaint." She looked at him. "There's a 13th account," he said. "One you didn't find. It's older. The first transfer is from 22 months ago, before you were even looking." He placed another page on the table. "The total across all accounts isn't 62,000. Emily was completely still. "It's 147,000, David said. The room went quiet. Sheriff Cook made a sound that wasn't quite a word. He picked up the page. Emily Carter sat at that table and understood in a way she had not fully understood until this moment the true dimensions of what Nathan had been doing. He hadn't been skimming. He hadn't been caught in opportunistic moments. He had been running a systematic multi-year financial operation inside this resort, and she had found the edge of it. She had found enough to threaten him, which was why he had moved against her, but she had not found all of it. $147,000, and he had been willing to destroy her to protect it. "I should have found this sooner," David said. His voice was raw. I've been in that accounting system for 2 years, Emily. This was there. I just wasn't looking for it." "Why are you telling me now?" she said, not accusatory, genuinely asking. David was quiet for a moment. "Because this morning I watched them tie your hands and put something in your mouth. And I stood in the back of that lobby and I didn't move for 60 seconds because I was calculating what it was going to cost me to say something." He looked at his hands. "Then Jesse talked, and Marcus talked, and Patricia walked across the lobby and stood next to you." He paused. "And I thought, what exactly is it that I'm protecting? Because it isn't anything worth what's happening to her right now." Sheriff Cook was already on his phone. Emily reached across the table and put her hand on David's arm. She didn't say anything. He looked up and nodded once, and that was enough. The financial forensic team arrived at 2:30 in the afternoon. They came from Phoenix 3 specialists, laptops, and equipment cases. The particular efficient calm of people who have done this many times and know exactly what they are looking for. They were met by David Lynn, who handed them his folder and spent 40 minutes briefing them on the accounting architecture before they set up in Nathan's own office, which felt like a particular kind of justice. Emily was still on the property. The sheriff had asked her to stay, and she had agreed partly because leaving felt wrong, like walking away before the last chapter, and partly because she genuinely did not know where else she would go. She could not go home and tell her mother what had happened. Not yet. Not until she knew how this ended. She sat in the lobby for a while, and then Patricia Huang found her and brought her to the staff break room, which was quieter, and made her a cup of coffee, and sat across from her in the particular comfortable silence that belongs to people who have been through something difficult together. "How long have you worked here?" Emily asked. 14 years, Patricia said. "Did you know about Nathan?" Patricia looked at her coffee. "I knew something was wrong," she said. "I didn't know what, but there are things you notice over 14 years. The way he looked at certain employees after they asked certain questions. The way the HR complaints used to disappear." She paused. 3 years ago, we had a maintenance supervisor named Gary Perkins. He filed a complaint about vendor billing. He thought the supply invoices were inflated. He was let go 6 weeks later. "Performance issues," they said. She looked at Emily. "Gary had been with this resort for 9 years. Emily said nothing. "I told myself it wasn't my place," Patricia said. "That I didn't have enough to say anything for certain. That my family needed my income and my retirement was 3 years away." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "I have been telling myself that every morning for a long time." "You stood up today," Emily said. 14 years late, Patricia said. "Still," Emily said. Patricia looked at her, really looked at her the way people do when they're deciding to say the true thing instead of the comfortable one. "You know what scared me most when they gagged you?" She stopped for a moment. "That wasn't an arrest. That was a statement. He was making a statement about what happens when you speak." She set down her mug. And I thought if I don't stand next to her right now, he wins that part of it. Even if everything else comes out, he wins that part, he said. Emily felt the tears come back. She pressed her fingers to her eyes and breathed through it. Your mother, Patricia said, she knows you're at work. She thinks it's a normal day, Emily said. I need to call her. Use my phone, Patricia said, sliding it across the table. Emily picked it up and then set it down. I'll wait, she said, until I know more. She's been through enough. I don't want her to worry until there's something not to worry about. Patricia nodded. Your father teach you that too, to wait until you know, Emily smiled small and genuine. He taught me a lot of things, she said. I'm only starting to understand how much. It was 4:47 in the afternoon when the forensic team lead, a woman named Sandra Okafor, walked into the lobby where Sheriff Cook was waiting and put a single printed sheet on the table. We've confirmed the secondary account structure, she said. 13 accounts total. The transfers are documented sourced to executive credentials and span a period of 22 months. The total including compound transfers is $151,430. She paused. There's also evidence of deliberate record alteration. The system logs show administrative edits made to 63 individual transaction records. Edits that were made from the executive workstation. She paused again. And we found the cash. The sheriff looked up. The $42,000 in Nathan Brooks' vehicle, Sandra said, in a laptop bag in the trunk, along with what appears to be a counterfeit key card encoded with Emily Carter's access credentials. The lobby was very quiet. He put the evidence in his own car, Cook said. He may have planned to move it, Sandra said, or he may have been too confident that the morning was going to go differently than it did. She closed her folder. Either way, it's there. Sheriff Cook rubbed his face with both hands. He had been doing this job for 21 years. He had seen people frame other people before. He had never seen it done with quite this level of architecture. He picked up his radio. The charges when they were formally filed that evening were substantial. Financial fraud, embezzlement, evidence tampering, false imprisonment, filing a false police report, the kind of list that does not belong to a misunderstanding or a moment of weakness. The kind of list that describes something that was built over a long time with considerable deliberate effort. Emily heard the list read aloud in the lobby and felt something she had not expected. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even relief. What she felt was grief. Grief for the version of Nathan Brooks that she had once worked for and believed to be real. Grief for the Gary Perkins of the world, who had lost their jobs and gone home and told themselves it was their fault. Grief for the 2 years she had sat in a building with a man who was doing this to people and to whom she had said good morning every day. She was still sitting with that feeling when Walt Holloway found her. He sat down across from her, the same chair the sheriff had occupied that morning, which felt like a long time ago. How are you doing? He said. I'm trying to figure that out, she said honestly. Take your time, Walt said. There's no wrong answer. She looked at him. This man she had never met, this stranger who had stopped in the middle of a lobby because of something her father had taught him 19 years ago. Can I ask you something? She said. Anything, Walt said. When you saw my signal, when you recognized it, what did you think in that first moment before anything else? Walt was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that means the answer is real and he's making sure he gets it right. I thought about your father, he said. I thought about being 24 years old and in the water in a storm that I was not coming back from. And I thought about the man who came back for me anyway, when nobody would have blamed him for not doing it. He looked at Emily steadily. And I thought his daughter is in that room asking for help, and I am the only person in this building who can hear her. Emily Carter pressed her lips together hard and looked at the ceiling. He would have done the same thing for you, she said finally. I know, Walt said. That's why it wasn't a choice. Outside, the late afternoon sun was doing something complicated to the Arizona sky, that thing it does in October, when the angle is exactly right, and the whole desert goes gold and red, and the shadows stretch long and strange across everything. Neither of them mentioned it, they just sat in it. After a while, Walt said, your father told me something else that night in the hospital, before the signal. He said the hardest part of any rescue isn't getting to the person who needs help. It's convincing them that help is real, that it's not just another wave. Emily thought about that. He was talking about the ocean, she said. Walt agreed. and other things too. Emily looked at her hands, the wrists still faintly red, the knuckles still tight from the morning. She had carried this for 4 months, alone in her office, alone at her kitchen table, alone in the parking lot sitting in her old car, talking herself back into the building every morning, because walking away was not something she was willing to do. I wasn't sure anyone would come, she said. It was the most honest thing she had said all day. I sent the evidence package, I filed the complaint, I set up the trigger, but I wasn't sure any of it was enough. And when they tied my hands, when he gagged me, I thought, this is it. This is the moment I lose. She stopped. And then I saw you walk in, and I had 1 second to decide whether the signal meant anything, whether anybody who remembered my father was actually out there. Walt Holloway looked at her. He's still out there, he said quietly. Through you, through every person he ever helped. That's how people like your father work. They don't stop when they're gone. They keep going through everyone they touched. Emily finally let the tears come. She did not sob. She did not break. She just let them fall quietly, the way people cry when the thing that held the tears in place finally lets go, not with drama, but with relief. Walt did not look away. He did not offer her a tissue or tell her it was okay. He just sat across from her and let her have the moment the way her father would have. And that, more than anything, more than all of it, was what made it real. The evidence was in the sheriff's hands. Nathan Brooks was in custody. The truth was out, documented and witnessed by 60 people and recorded on a dozen cell phones and confirmed by forensic accountants who had spent 6 hours in Nathan's own office, pulling apart everything he had spent 22 months building. It was not over the charges, the legal process, the months ahead. None of that was over, but the silence was. And after 4 months of carrying the truth alone, in careful quiet with no one who knew the full weight of what she was holding, the silence ending was everything. Emily drove home at 6:43 in the evening. She knew the exact time because she looked at the clock when she started the car, the same way she always did, the same small habit she had carried for years without ever questioning it. The parking lot was mostly empty. The sheriff's vehicle was gone. The unmarked sedan from corporate was gone. Nathan Brooks was gone. 19 motorcycles were still parked in perfect formation near the east entrance because Walt's team had stayed. Nobody had asked them to. They had simply not left. The way people who understand loyalty don't need to be asked to demonstrate it. She sat in the car for a moment before starting the engine. Her hands were in her lap. The red marks on her wrists had faded to pink. Her lunch, the ham sandwich, and the apple she had packed the night before was still in her bag on the passenger seat, untouched. She thought about what David had said. $151,000, 22 months, 13 accounts. She thought about Gary Perkins, whose name she had never heard before today, who had filed a complaint 9 years into a job and been let go 6 weeks later, and probably still believed on some level that he had done something wrong. She started the car and drove home. Margaret Carter was in the kitchen when Emily walked in. She had made soup, the simple chicken soup she made when she was feeling better than usual, the one that took most of the afternoon because she started the stock from scratch, and the smell of it hit Emily the moment she opened the door and very nearly undid her completely. "You're late," her mother said, without turning from the stove. "I was about to call." "Long day," Emily said. She set her bag down near the door. She took off her jacket. She did these things carefully, the way a person does when they are managing something, by focusing on small physical actions. Margaret turned and looked at her. 59 years old, thin from the treatments, but with eyes that had always been extraordinarily perceptive, the kind of eyes that could read Emily at a distance across a room that had been able to read her since she was 4 years old and trying to hide the fact that she had broken something. "Sit down," Margaret said. "Mom, I'm fine." "Emily Jean Carter, sit down." Emily sat down. Margaret turned off the burner. She came to the table. She sat across from her daughter and looked at her wrists, the faint remaining pink barely visible. And Emily watched her mother's eyes register it and understand something, not all of it, but enough. "Tell me," Margaret said. So Emily told her. Not everything, not all at once, not in the precise chronological order she had given it to the sheriff. She told it the way you tell things to your mother, circling back, filling in, stopping in places where the words had edges that cut. She told her about the vendor code she found in June. She told her about the meeting with Nathan. She told her about the HR warning and the months of building evidence alone. She told her about October 14th about the cuffs and the gay in the lobby full of people recording. When she got to Walt, her mother's expression changed. He knew your father, Margaret said. He did. 2007, the Seattle storm. Emily looked at her. Did Dad ever mention him? Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Walt, she said softly as if testing the name against memory. He mentioned a Walt once. He said there was a man he pulled out of a bad situation up in Seattle and that the man had reminded him of what the work was for. She stopped. He said some rescues are physical and some rescues are something else. He said that one was both. Emily felt it again, that unbearable tenderness that came with any mention of her father. The grief that had never fully settled into the past tense, because some people don't fit there, no matter how long they've been gone. He sent Walt's family the signal, Emily said, and tonight, because of that, I'm sitting at this table. Margaret reached across and took Emily's hand. She held it the way she had held it when Emily was small and frightened, and the world had felt too large. She did not say everything was okay. She did not say your father would be proud, because that was the kind of thing that sounds right, but sits wrong in the moments when the feeling is too large for comfort. She just held her hand, and after a long time she said, "The soup is ready." And that was enough. Sire. The arraignment was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In those 3 weeks, things happened with a speed that Emily found simultaneously satisfying and disorienting, like watching something you built in slow motion disassemble itself and fast forward. The forensic accounting team produced a full report. Corporate headquarters sent a vice president, a real one, not the compliance middleman she had been routed to before, who arrived on a Tuesday morning with an apology that was the most carefully worded document Emily had ever read, and also, she felt the most genuine apology she had received from an institution in her entire life. His name was Richard Yates. He was 57, gray-suited, with the air of a man who had managed crises before and had learned somewhere along the way that the performance of corporate contrition was significantly less effective than the actual thing. He sat across from Emily in a conference room at the resort and placed a folder on the table and did not open it. "Ms. Carter," he said, "I want to say something before we discuss any specifics." "Okay," she said. "You filed a complaint through our ethics channel 93 days before October 14th. Our team received it. It was logged assigned and," he stopped. He started again. "It was deprioritized. The person who received the complaint had a backlog. The initial review flagged it as requiring follow-up, and that follow-up was not completed with the urgency it required." He met her eyes. 3 months passed. During those 3 months, you continued building evidence alone without support, while the person you had reported attempted to destroy your career and your reputation and your freedom. Emily said nothing. "That is a failure of our system," Yates said. "Not a procedural failure, a fundamental failure. We ask employees to trust us with their most dangerous truths, and in your case, we did not honor that trust." "No," Emily said, "you didn't. I would like to discuss remediation. Meaningful remediation, not a settlement with a confidentiality clause. You've been through enough of being silenced." He opened the folder. "But first I wanted to make sure you heard that from me directly without lawyers in the room." Emily looked at him for a long moment. "The man who was almost let go because of Gary Perkins' complaint 9 years ago," she said. "Do you know who that was?" Yates frowned. "Gary Perkins, the maintenance supervisor. Do you know what happened to him after he was let go?" "I don't," Yates admitted. "Then that's where I'd like to start," Emily said. "Before we talk about anything else, I want to know what happened to Gary Perkins." Yates looked at her. He nodded slowly. "I'll find out," he said. "Good," Emily said. She folded her hands on the table. "Now let's talk about remediation." The arraignment was on a Thursday. Nathan Brooks entered his not guilty plea in a courtroom in downtown Scottsdale with a defense attorney who had driven up from Phoenix and billed at $480 an hour. I was wearing a suit Emily had seen him wear to the resort's annual fundraiser gala. He looked from a distance almost exactly like himself. Emily was not required to attend, but she did. She sat in the third row with David Lin on one side and unexpectedly Patricia Huang on the other. Patricia had driven herself, had not told Emily she was coming, had simply appeared in the hallway outside the courtroom 10 minutes before the hearing started. "You didn't have to come," Emily said. "I know," Patricia said. That was the entire conversation about it. The hearing lasted 40 minutes. The charges were read. The plea was entered. A trial date was set for 7 months out. Nathan stood at the defense table with his hands clasped in front of him and his face composed and his eyes looking at a point somewhere above the judge's head. And Emily watched him and thought about all the mornings she had said good morning to this man in the hallway. And he had said good morning back and smiled the warm, attentive smile, and neither of them had said what was actually true. She had been afraid of him for 4 months. Not physically, Nathan had never threatened her physically. But the particular fear of a person who has power over your livelihood, your future, your ability to care for your mother. That fear had lived in her chest every morning. She walked into the Silver Canyon Resort, and every evening she drove home, and every night she sat at her kitchen table with her flash drive and her documented evidence and told herself to keep going. Sitting in that courtroom, she realized the fear was gone. Not in a triumphant way, just gone. Like a sound that has been present so long you stop hearing it and only notice it in the moment it stops. She drove home and didn't think about Nathan Brooks for the rest of the day. Walt Holloway called her 2 days after the arraignment. She almost didn't answer an unknown number, and she had been getting more of those lately, reporters, mostly since the story had gotten out, in the way stories get out when 60 people witnessed something and half of them posted it online. She had not spoken to any of them. She had given one written statement through corporate's communications team and left it there. But something made her pick up. "Ms. Carter," Walt said. "It's Walt Holloway. I hope this is okay. I got your number from the corporate team. They said you'd approved contact." "I did," she said. "I hoped you'd call." "How are you doing?" "Better," she said. "Getting there." "Good." There was a brief pause. "I wanted to tell you something I didn't get to say at the resort. Or I said part of it, but not all." "Okay," she said. "Your father saved my life twice," Walt said. "Once on the water. I told you that part. The second time it was about a year after the rescue. I was in a bad place. Not the ocean kind, the internal kind." He was quiet for a moment. "Jack Carter was the person who called me. He had tracked down my number somehow. I don't know how, Coast Guard contacts, I guess. He called and he said he'd been thinking about me and wanted to know how I was doing. Just that. Just asking." Another pause. "We talked for 2 hours. I've never told anyone that story. But I want you to know it because you should know who your father was to people who weren't related to him." Emily was sitting on her porch. The evening was cool, that early November cool that comes to Arizona before winter settles in, and the sky was doing the thing it does at that hour, deepening, going serious. "I was the same at home," she said. "He called people. He checked on them. He remembered things about people that they'd forgotten they'd told him." She smiled into the phone. "He remembered everyone's details. Names of kids, names of dogs, what kind of trouble someone was working through 3 years ago." "That's a rare thing," Walt said. "It is," Emily agreed. Walt said, "I want to ask you something. My organization, we do a lot of charity work, veteran support community programs, and I've been thinking for a while now about adding something around workplace safety, protection for people who speak up inside companies. It's a problem I don't think enough people take seriously until they're in the middle of it." He paused. "Would you be willing to talk about that sometime? Not a commitment, just a conversation." Emily was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "I'd be willing to talk about that." "Good," Walt said, and she could hear over the phone the particular quality of a smile from someone who doesn't smile easily, but means it completely when they do. "Your father would be insufferably pleased with you, you know." Emily laughed. It came out sudden and real, the kind of laugh that surprises you. "He would have been very calm about it in person, and then told literally everyone he knew." "That's exactly right," Walt said. "That is exactly what he would have done." The question of what came next was one that Emily had not fully allowed herself to consider during the months she had spent building her case. She had been so focused on the immediate task, gather the evidence, protect the evidence, survive long enough for the evidence to matter, that she had not built a picture of what happened after. After arrived in pieces. The first piece was a meeting with Richard Yates 3 weeks after the arraignment, in which he told her that Gary Perkins had been located living in Tucson, working as a facilities manager for a school district, and that corporate was prepared to offer him a settlement and a formal acknowledgement that his termination 9 years ago had been retaliatory and unjust. Emily had asked to be in the room for that phone call. Yates had said yes. She listened to Gary Perkins' voice on the speakerphone, a man in his late 50s, careful and guarded, at first the particular guardedness of someone who has been burned and has not fully recovered from it. She listened to Yates deliver the acknowledgement. She listened to the silence on the other end of the line after. And then Gary Perkins said very quietly, "I thought I was crazy. For 9 years. I thought maybe I'd been wrong about what I saw." "You weren't wrong," Yates said. Another silence. "I need a minute," Gary said. "Take all the time you need," Yates said. Emily sat in that conference room and listened to a man on a speakerphone take a minute to absorb the information that the thing he had believed for 9 years, that he had been right and that right had cost him his career, was actually true. She thought about the weight of 9 years of that particular doubt, the specific erosion of not knowing whether your own perception of events is reliable. She thought about how close she had come to that same place. She thought about the flash drive in her desk, the evidence she had built, the scheduled trigger, her father's voice in her head saying slow is smooth, smooth is fast. "Mr. Perkins," she said, and Yates looked at her with slight surprise because she had said she would only listen. "My name is Emily Carter. I'm the accountant who found the current evidence. I just wanted you to know your original complaint is in the file. It's documented. You were the first person who tried to stop this." A long pause. "Who are you?" Gary Perkins said. "I'm someone who knows what it cost you to say something," Emily said, "and I think you deserve to know it wasn't wasted." The second piece was her promotion. She had not asked for it. The offer came from Yates directly in a separate meeting with specifics. Corporate headquarters wanted to establish a new internal compliance department, an independent oversight function with genuine authority to investigate financial misconduct and whistleblower complaints. They wanted Emily to lead it. She took 4 days to think about it. She talked to her mother, who said very little but looked at her with the expression that meant she had already made up her mind and was waiting for Emily to arrive at the same conclusion. She talked to David Lynn, who said he would apply for the assistant controller position if it opened up, which she took as his way of saying he thought she should do it. She called Walt Holloway, who listened to the whole thing without interrupting, and then said, "What does your gut say?" "My gut says yes," Emily said. "Then yes," Walt said. She called Yates on the 4th day and accepted. The third piece was the thing she had not planned for, the thing she had not built toward or strategized or prepared. It was simpler than that. It was the morning about 6 weeks after October 14th when she was getting ready for work and she caught herself looking at the clock. 6:22. She was ahead of schedule. She had time. She made herself a second cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table and just sat. Not working, not worrying, not running numbers in her head or checking the encrypted email account or reviewing the evidence file. Just sitting. Her mother came downstairs in her robe and saw her there and stopped in the doorway. "You look different," Margaret said. "I feel different," Emily said. "Good different." Emily thought about it. About Nathan in the courtroom with his eyes fixed above the judge's head. About Jesse behind the front desk saying, "I check the employee access log every morning." About Patricia standing in the lobby without being asked. About David in his folder. About Marcus Webb, 26 years old, stepping forward at the moment that mattered. About Walt Holloway stopping in the middle of a lobby because a woman he had never met gave him a signal a man taught him 19 years ago on a night when the ocean was trying to take his life. About her father who had somehow known that the signal would be needed someday and had taken the time to teach it, not because he could predict the future, but because he understood that the people who are paying attention are the ones who make the difference. "Yeah," Emily said. "Good different." Margaret came in and poured herself a cup of coffee and sat across from her daughter, and they drank their coffee together in the kitchen as the morning came in through the window, and neither of them needed to say anything about what the last 2 months had been, because some things are understood without requiring words. That was the thing Emily had learned in the end, or one of the things, because there were many, and she was still learning them, that the most important communications are sometimes the ones that happen without language. 3 nods, 3 blinks, a woman standing beside you in a lobby without saying a word, a man making a phone call because he remembered a promise, a father who spent his entire life teaching people how to listen and left behind in the people he had touched, something that kept working long after he was gone. Justice had not arrived as a thunderclap. It had arrived the way most real things do, piece by piece, person by person, each one making a decision in a specific moment to speak, instead of staying silent to step forward, instead of stepping back to ask the question even when the answer might be costly. Nathan Brooks had counted on silence. He had engineered it, cultivated it, depended on it. He had built his entire operation on the assumption that people would calculate the personal cost of speaking and decide it was too high. He had been wrong about Gary Perkins. He had been wrong about Jesse and Marcus and David and Patricia. He had been wrong about Walt Holloway standing in a lobby in 2026 and remembering a hospital room in Seattle in 2007. And he had been most profoundly, most completely, most irreversibly wrong about Emily Carter. Because Emily Carter was the daughter of a man who had sailed into storms other people turned away from, who had made promises he kept, who had believed with his whole heart and his whole career that the person in the water is always worth the risk of reaching for. She was his daughter in every possible way, and she had never once stopped swimming. The trial date was set for 7 months out, but the legal machinery started moving long before that. Emily learned quickly that justice in a courtroom is nothing like justice in a lobby. In a lobby, truth moves fast, one person speaks, another follows, and within the span of an hour, the whole architecture of a lie can come apart in front of witnesses. In a courtroom, truth moves through procedure, through motions filed and hearings scheduled, and arguments made about the admissibility of evidence that you personally spent 4 months of your life building at your kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night while your mother slept down the hall. Nathan's defense attorney, a man named Clifford Marsh, who had a reputation in Phoenix legal circles for being very good at making complicated financial cases seem complicated in the wrong direction, filed 3 preliminary motions in the first 5 weeks. The first challenged the chain of custody on the vault access logs. The second argued that the forensic accounting report had relied on data pulled without proper authorization. The third was the one that made Emily's stomach drop when her own attorney called to tell her about it. Marsh was arguing that Emily's corporate ethics complaint, the one she had filed 93 days before October 14th, had constituted a form of preliminary accusation against Nathan, and that her subsequent evidence gathering had been conducted with bias and personal motivation. I was going to argue in front of a jury that Emily Carter had not discovered Nathan's fraud. She had constructed a narrative around legitimate business transactions because she had a personal financial grudge against her employer. "He's going to put me on trial," Emily said flatly. Her attorney, a woman named Sonia Reeves, who had been recommended by corporate and who Emily had decided to trust within about 12 minutes of their first meeting, said, "He's going to try to. Our job is to make sure the jury sees the evidence before they see his story about the evidence." "Can he do it?" Emily asked. "Make the jury believe it." Sonia was quiet for a beat, and Emily appreciated that she did not immediately reassure her. "Clifford Marsh is very good at what he does," Sonia said. "He's going to make you look like a disgruntled employee who built a case out of coincidences and grievances. He's going to point to the HR warning in your file. He's going to point to your mother's medical bills as motive for resentment. He's going to make everything you did look like obsession rather than diligence." Emily was sitting at her kitchen table. The same kitchen table. The flash drive was in her desk now, officially logged as evidence. But the habit of the table, the habit of sitting here with something difficult and working through it, had stayed. "And the cash in his trunk," Emily said. "He'll argue it was planted," Sonia said. "That someone on the investigation team, possibly someone associated with you, placed it there to strengthen the case." "That's insane," Emily said. "It doesn't have to be true," Sonia said. "It just has to be possible. Reasonable doubt is a very specific and very navigable target for someone like Marsh." Emily was quiet for a long moment. "What do we do?" "We prepare," Sonia said. "Starting now. Starting with you telling me every single detail, not just the evidence, but everything. Every conversation, every look he gave you, every time something felt wrong before you had proof that it was. I need the complete picture, not just the documents." "That's going to take a long time," Emily said. "Good," Sonia said. "We have 7 months. Let's use them." The preparation was a different kind of work than building the evidence had been. Building the evidence had required patience and precision, but it had also had the particular sustaining quality of forward motion. Each document she found, each transaction she traced was a step towards something. The trial preparation was different. It required her to go backward to excavate 4 months of experience and examine it not the way she had lived it from the inside in the dark, uncertain, but the way a jury would see it from the outside, all at once, with the knowledge of how it ended already built into the frame. Sonia worked her hard. They met twice a week in Sonia's office downtown, and the sessions ran long, sometimes 3 hours, sometimes 4. Sonia asked the same questions Clifford Marsh was going to ask about the HR warning about her mother's medical bills, about whether Emily had ever expressed anger or resentment toward Nathan to any colleague. Each time Sonia pushed harder, not because she doubted Emily, but because she needed Emily to be ready for the version of these questions that Marsh would ask, which would be the same questions wearing different clothes. He's going to ask you about your father, Sonia said one afternoon about 6 weeks in. Emily looked up. What? Your father's connection to Walt Holloway. Marsh is going to use it. He's going to argue that the whole Hells Angels involvement was not a coincidence, that you orchestrated it, that you knew Holloway would be at the resort that day, that you arranged the signal in advance, that the entire lobby scene was staged to generate sympathy and public pressure before the investigators arrived. Emily stared at her. I had never met Walt Holloway in my life before that morning. I know that, Sonia said, and we can prove it: phone records, emails, Walt's own testimony. But I need you to understand what Marsh is going to try to do with the most emotionally powerful part of this story. He's going to try to make it look manufactured. Because if he can make the jury believe the lobby scene was staged, he can make them question everything else. Emily felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear exactly, something more specific, the particular anger of someone who has had their most genuine, most unguarded moment weaponized and turned into ammunition. He's going to use my father, she said. He's going to use a dead man's memory to try to get Nathan Brooks acquitted. He's going to try, Sonia said. And when he does, I need you to be completely steady. No anger, no tears, steady. Emily looked at her attorney for a long moment. I know how to be steady, she said. I know you do, Sonia said. I've been watching you for 6 weeks. I just need you to do it in a room full of strangers who are going to be looking for any sign that you're someone other than who you say you are. 3 months before the trial, something happened that nobody had anticipated. Marcus Webb came forward. Marcus was 26 years old, the security technician who had stepped forward in the lobby on October 14th to say that the cameras had been taken offline at management's request, that there was no maintenance record justifying it. He had given a statement to the sheriff that day and had been included in the prosecution's witness list. What nobody had known, what Marcus had not told anyone until he showed up in Sonia Reeves' office on a Tuesday morning unannounced, was that he had something else. Sonia called Emily from the office at 11:45 that morning. I need you to come in, she said. Now, if you can. Emily was at her desk at corporate headquarters. She had started the new compliance role 6 weeks prior, still learning the dimensions of the BAO, still building the department from scratch. She told her assistant she had an appointment and drove downtown. She walked into Sonia's conference room to find Marcus Webb sitting at the table looking like a man who had not slept properly in several weeks. He was in civilian clothes, not a work uniform. He had left the Silver Canyon Resort the week after October 14th. He was holding a coffee mug with both hands. He looked up when Emily came in, and she watched something move across his face. Guilt, relief, and something harder to name. The particular expression of someone who is about to do a difficult thing and has been working up to it for a long time. Ms. Carter, he said. Marcus, she said. She sat down across from him. What do you have? He set down the mug. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small device, a personal data drive, smaller than a thumb, the kind that security technicians sometimes use for system backups. The night I took the cameras offline, he said, Nathan called me directly. I thought it was a standard maintenance request. General managers can authorize overnight camera work. It's protocol. But something felt off. He was too specific about which cameras and too specific about the timing. He stopped. So I kept a copy. Emily looked at the drive. A copy of what? The camera footage, Marcus said, from the 48 hours before Nathan took the vault corridor cameras offline, including the segment that shows him entering the vault corridor himself. Twice. At 9:47 p.m. and 11:12 p.m. on October 13th. The conference room went completely still. Sonia, who had already heard this once, was watching Emily's face. Emily looked at the drive. She looked at Marcus. You've had this since October 14th, she said. Her voice was absolutely level. You stepped forward in the lobby. You gave a statement to the sheriff. You've been on the witness list for 3 months, and you've had this the entire time. Marcus's jaw tightened. Yes, he said. Why didn't you give it to the investigators then? I was quiet for a long moment. Because I was scared, he said. I knew what was on it. I knew what it meant. And I thought maybe the other evidence was enough. Maybe they didn't need this. Maybe I could just give the statement and not have to. He stopped. He pressed both hands flat on the table. That's not the real reason. Emily waited. The real reason, Marcus said, is that if I gave them this drive, I had to explain why I made a copy in the first place. And the reason I made a copy is because I suspected something was wrong when he called me. And if I suspected something was wrong and I took the cameras offline anyway, he stopped again. I was part of it, not intentionally, but I did it. I followed the order. And then I held the evidence for 3 months because I was trying to figure out if there was a way to do the right thing without it costing me everything. The room was completely silent. Emily looked at this 26-year-old man sitting across from her who had been carrying this for 3 months, who had stepped forward in the lobby and said the true thing about the cameras, but had kept the bigger true thing locked in his jacket pocket because the bigger true thing came with a personal cost that the smaller one didn't. She understood this. She understood it completely and specifically in the way that only someone who had spent 4 months doing their own version of the same calculation could understand it. Marcus, she said, did you know what Nathan was going to do with the cameras being offline? No, he said immediately. I thought it was maintenance. I genuinely thought it was maintenance. Then you didn't do anything wrong, she said. I held the evidence for. You're here now, Emily said. That's the decision that matters. Marcus looked at her. His eyes were red around the edges. I kept thinking about what you said in the lobby when they took the gag off. You said you could prove it. His voice was rough. And I kept thinking, what if the evidence isn't enough? What if it comes down to your word and his word in front of a jury and they choose wrong? And this thing is sitting in my pocket and I'm not giving it to anyone because I'm protecting myself. He shook his head. I couldn't live with that. Sonia picked up the drive and set it carefully in front of her. Marcus, I need to ask you directly. Is this footage unaltered? Has anything been edited, deleted, or modified? No, he said. It's the original backup file. You can verify it against the system timestamps. Okay, Sonia said. I'm going to need your full statement, everything starting from when Nathan called you that night. Every word of the conversation you can remember. I remember all of it, Marcus said. Sonia looked at Emily. Emily was looking at the drive on the table. $151,000. 22 months. 13 accounts. A planted cash trail. A gagged woman in a lobby. And now this Nathan Brooks walking into his own vault on camera twice the night before he accused Emily Carter of stealing from it. Does Marsh know about this footage? Emily said. Not yet, Sonia said. Emily nodded slowly. He's going to argue it's fabricated, she said. He's going to try, Sonia said. But system timestamp verification is not something you can argue around easily. If the metadata matches the resort server records, and I'm betting it does, the footage is unimpeachable. Emily looked at Marcus one more time. Thank you, she said. I know what it cost you to come here. Marcus picked up his coffee mug again. His hands were steadier than when she had walked in. Your attorney told me something when I called her this morning, he said, before I came in. Emily glanced at Sonia. I told him, Sonia said carefully, that the most important decision anyone makes in a case like this is usually not the first decision. It's the second one. The one they make when they've had time to calculate the column and they decide the truth is worth it anyway. Marcus nodded. Yeah, he said. That's what she said. Clifford Marsh received the footage evidence disclosure 3 days later. Sonia told Emily about the call she received from Marsh's office 40 minutes after the disclosure package was delivered. She relayed it without editorializing in the precise factual way that Emily had come to recognize as Sonia's version of barely contained satisfaction. He asked if we were certain about the timestamp verification, Sonia said. What did you say? Emily said. I said we had 3 independent forensic technicians confirm it, and we were happy to share their reports. And then he said he would need to speak with his client. Emily was quiet for a moment. He's going to recommend a plea, she said. That's my read, Sonia said. Yes. The plea offer came 11 days later. Nathan Brooks, through Clifford Marsh, was prepared to enter a guilty plea on reduced charges. 2 counts of financial fraud, 1 count of evidence tampering in exchange for a sentencing recommendation that kept the prison term below 5 years. Emily read the offer sitting at her desk at the compliance department office she had built over the past 2 months. The office had a window. She had chosen it specifically for the window, not for the view, but because for 4 months she had sat in an interior office on the third floor of a resort with no windows, doing the most important work of her life, and she had promised herself that whatever came next would have a window. She called Sonia. "What's your recommendation?" "Strategically taking it makes sense," Sonia said. "The footage is strong, but trials are uncertain. A guaranteed conviction on reduced charges is a better outcome than a hung jury." "What does the prosecution say?" "They want to proceed. They think the footage makes a full conviction likely." Sonia paused. "But this is your decision, Emily, not theirs, not mine. You're the one who was tied up in that lobby. You're the one who built the case. You tell me what you need from this." Emily thought about Gary Perkins on a speakerphone in Tucson saying, "I thought I was crazy." For 9 years, she thought about Patricia Huang saying 14 years late. She thought about Marcus Webb with his hands around a coffee mug and 3 months of a secret wearing on him. She thought about what Nathan had counted on: silence, compliance, the careful personal calculation of what it costs to speak versus what it costs to stay quiet. "I want the jury to hear it," Emily said. "All of it. I want it in the public record. I want there to be no version of this story where Nathan Brooks pleaded to something small and the rest of it stayed in a folder somewhere." She paused. "I want the jury to see the footage." Sonia was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said, "then that's what we do." The trial lasted 9 days. 9 days of testimony, cross-examination, forensic accounting, breakdowns, and the particular grinding procedural reality of a criminal case that is nothing like what Emily had imagined it would feel like, and everything like what Sonia had warned her it would be. Clifford Marsh was every bit as good as his reputation. He cross-examined Emily for 4 hours across 2 days, and he was precise and careful and relentless in the way that very expensive attorneys are relentless. Not aggressive, not theatrical, but steady, asking the same questions in 12 different configurations, probing for inconsistency, looking for the one moment where Emily's composure would crack and give the jury something to doubt. She did not give it to him. She answered every question in the same steady, specific voice she had used when she told the sheriff the truth in the lobby of the Silver Canyon Resort. She did not editorialize. She did not express anger. When Marsh brought up her mother's medical bills, and he did at length, constructing a portrait of a financially desperate woman with motive to fabricate a case against her employer, Emily answered each question with the particular calmness of someone who has already made peace with the thing being used against them. When Marsh asked about Walt Holloway, Emily looked at the jury and said, "My father taught that signal to his family when I was 16 years old. He taught it as a general protocol, a way to ask for help when speaking isn't safe. I did not know Walt Holloway. I did not know he would be in that lobby. I gave the signal because I had nothing else, and my hands were bound and my mouth was covered, and I was trying to communicate what was true to anyone in that room who might be able to hear it." She paused. "Walt Holloway heard it because my father taught him what to listen for. That is not a conspiracy. That is a man keeping a promise." The jury was very still. Marsh moved on. The footage was shown on the 4th day of trial. The courtroom saw Nathan Brooks entering the executive vault corridor at 9:47 p.m. on October 13th. They saw him exit 14 minutes later. They saw him return at 11:12 p.m. and exit 23 minutes after that. The timestamps were verified. The metadata was confirmed. The footage was unaltered. Nathan sat at the defense table and looked at the screen, and his face was the face of a man watching something that he had believed would never exist being shown to 12 strangers in high definition. Marsh did argue it was fabricated. He did it professionally with his full technical vocabulary, citing theoretical vulnerabilities in backup systems and raising questions about chain of custody. The forensic technician who had verified the timestamps spent 45 minutes on the stand, explaining in language that was accessible without being condescending exactly why the footage was genuine. The jury deliberated for 11 hours. Emily sat in a conference room near the courtroom with Sonia and David Lin, who had come for the verdict, and Patricia Huang, who had come every day of the trial, and sat in the gallery every day without being asked. Walt Holloway was not there. He had given his testimony on day 3 and driven back to his life, which was not in a courtroom in Scottsdale. But he had texted Emily that morning, "Thinking of you," Your father is in the room. She had not been able to respond to that without crying, so she had not responded yet. She would later. At 4:17 in the afternoon, the jury returned. Guilty on all counts. Financial fraud in the first degree, embezzlement, evidence tampering, false imprisonment, filing a false police report, all counts. Emily heard the verdict and felt something she had not expected. Not triumph, not relief, but a kind of quiet, bone-deep settledness. Like the moment after a storm when the air is completely clean and everything is simply itself again, without the pressure of what had been building. David Lynn said something. She did not catch it, but she understood the intention and nodded. Patricia put her hand briefly on Emily's arm. Sonia said, "Well done." And what she meant was, you did this, you built this, you held it together long enough for it to matter. Emily nodded. She looked at her hands in her lap, hands that had held a flash drive in a car in a parking lot. Hands that had sent an encrypted email at 11 o'clock at night while her mother slept. Hands that had been cuffed behind her back in a lobby full of witnesses. She thought about something her father had said once she had been maybe 14, and he had come home late after a difficult call, and he had sat at the kitchen table with his coffee, and she had sat across from him, and he had said, "The ocean doesn't care who's right. It just is what it is. You have to respect that and work within it. You don't fight the water. You work with the truth of it." She had not understood it then, not completely. She was starting to understand it now. Nathan Brooks was sentenced 4 weeks later, 6 years. The judge in her sentencing remarks noted specifically the deliberate and sustained nature of the fraud, the retaliatory targeting of an employee who had attempted to report misconduct, and the particular cruelty of the public humiliation on October 14th. She called it a systematic abuse of institutional power and said those words as if she meant them, which Emily believed she did. Nathan said nothing when the sentence was delivered. He looked for the first time in all the months Emily had watched him in the courtroom, in photographs in the lobby on October 14th, like a man of his actual age. Not distinguished, not authoritative, just a 54-year-old man who had spent too long building a version of himself that wasn't real and was now standing in the wreckage of it. Emily did not feel sorry for him. She did not feel anything for him, really. What she was an absence, the absence of all the space he had occupied in her mind for 4 months, all the mental energy spent anticipating his next move, all the careful calculation of his probable responses. That space was empty now, clean. She was already thinking about what to put in it. She walked out of this courthouse with Sonia beside her, and the November air cold on her face and her phone in her hand, with Walt's unanswered text still open. She stopped on the steps and typed a response. Guilty on all counts. He was in the room. 3 dots appeared immediately. Then so was Jack. Emily stood on the courthouse steps and held her phone and let that sit for a moment, because some things deserve to be felt completely before you move past them. Then she put her phone in her pocket and walked toward her car and the next version of her life, which was waiting for her to arrive. The compliance department Emily built was not large, and she had chosen that deliberately. She had seen what happened to oversight functions that grew too fast. They became bureaucratic. They developed their own institutional inertia. They started protecting themselves instead of the people they were supposed to protect. She wanted something lean and credible and genuinely independent, which meant she had to fight for the independence before she could fight for anything else. Her first battle was with the legal department. 3 weeks into her new role, the company's general counsel, a man named Hargrove, who had been with corporate for 19 years and who had the particular professional confidence of someone accustomed to being the final word on anything that touched risk, came to her office and sat down and explained very politely that all whistleblower complaints processed through her department would need to be reviewed by legal before any investigation was opened. Emily listened to his entire argument without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "I understand the concern, and I'm going to respectfully decline." Hargrove blinked. "Excuse me. If legal reviews complaints before investigation, then the people most at risk from those complaints, which is sometimes going to be senior management or legal adjacent functions, have advance notice that they're being looked at. That's not a compliance department. That's a notification system." She looked at him steadily. "I'll report findings to legal after investigation is complete, not before." "That's not how this has traditionally worked," Hargrove said. "I know," Emily said, That's part of why we're here. He left without agreeing. He came back 2 days later with a counter-proposal. She modified it slightly, accepted the parts that made operational sense, held the line on independence, and shook his hand. Hargrove was not a bad man. He was a man whose job was to manage exposure, and he was very good at it. Emily's job was to make sure exposure was managed honestly, and she was getting very good at that. She hired 3 people in the first 2 months. David Lynn transferred from the accounting department. She had asked him directly, sitting across from him in the same conference room where he had handed her the vault access log on October 14th, and he had said yes before she finished the sentence. She brought in a former labor attorney named Keisha Powell, who had spent 8 years doing employee-side advocacy and understood the texture of retaliation from the inside. And she hired a young analyst named Tom Reyes, 24 years old, who had a forensic accounting background, and the particular kind of methodical patience that reminded Emily of herself at that age, which she took as a good sign. The 4 of them built the department's protocols from scratch, which was slower than working from a template, but produced something that fit the actual dimensions of the problem. Emily insisted on one rule above all others: every complaint received a response within 48 hours. Not a resolution. Resolutions took time, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. But an acknowledgement, a real one with a name attached. Someone saying, "We received this, we are treating it as real. You are not alone in this." That rule came from her own experience. 93 days between her ethics complaint and any meaningful response. 93 days, during which she had carried the weight of what she knew entirely alone. She was never going to let that be the experience of someone who came to her department. 48 hours is aggressive, Keisha said during one of their early planning sessions. I know, Emily said. Some of these complaints are going to be complex. Some are going to require. The acknowledgement is 48 hours, Emily said. Not the resolution, the acknowledgement, and the human being saying, "I see you, I hear you, you are not invisible." She paused. That's what I needed. That's what I didn't get. And that's what we're going to give every single person who comes through this. Keisha looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded once and made a note. 6 months after the verdict, Emily received a letter. It came to her office at corporate headquarters, forwarded from the Silver Canyon Resort, forwarded from the HR department, which meant it had been traveling through corporate mail for almost 2 weeks before it found her. The envelope was plain white handwritten address, postmarked Tucson. She opened it at her desk on a Tuesday afternoon. It was from Gary Perkins. He wrote the way people write when they have been composing something in their head for a long time before they actually put it on paper carefully with the particular density of someone who has edited as they went. He thanked her for being on the call with Yates. He told her about the settlement which had been finalized the previous month and said that it was not about the money, though the money mattered practically. He said it was about a sentence in the acknowledgement letter. Corporate had sent a sentence that said his 2015 complaint had been valid, had been based on accurate observations, and that his termination had been retaliatory and unjust. 9 years, he wrote. I spent 9 years thinking I had imagined it or exaggerated it or that there was something wrong with the way I saw things. And then I read that sentence and I sat in my kitchen for a long time. He said he was still in Tucson. He liked his job. His kids were grown. He was doing okay. Then he wrote, I want you to know I almost didn't file that complaint in 2015. I stood in front of the ethics hotline number for 2 weeks before I called. And after they let me go, I told myself I should have trusted that instinct, that the cost of speaking was always going to be higher than the cost of silence. But you proved me wrong about that. Or maybe you proved me right in a different direction, that the cost of speaking is real, but it's not the last word on the matter. He signed it, Gary, and then underneath in slightly different ink, like he had added it after, thank you for finding what I left behind. Emily read the letter twice. She put it in the top drawer of her desk, not filed, not archived, just in the drawer close. She thought about calling him. She sat with that thought for a few minutes, then decided against it because some things are complete in the form they arrive in, and a letter answered with a letter felt right, in a way a phone call wouldn't. She wrote back that afternoon 3 paragraphs, honest and specific, and put it in the outgoing mail before she could overthink it. The seminar came together in the way that real things come together. Not all at once, not from a single inspiration, but gradually built from many separate conversations and decisions until one day it had enough structure to be called a plan. The original conversation had been with Walt on the phone about his organization's interest in workplace safety programming. They had talked about it intermittently over the months of the trial, circling it without quite landing. After the verdict, after the sentence, after Emily had spent 2 months building her compliance department and learning the specific textures of what systemic workplace silence looked like from the inside of an institution, trying to address it after all of that, she called Walt and said, "I want to do the seminar." "Okay," Walt said. "What do you need at venue?" 100 people approximately, mix of corporate employees, small business workers, anyone who's ever been in a situation where they knew something was wrong and didn't know what to do about it. When spring, she said, "I want enough time to build the curriculum properly." "Done," Walt said. "Walt," she said, "I want you to be there." A pause. "I'm not a speaker," he said. "I'm not asking you to speak," she said. "I'm asking you to be there. There's a difference." I was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." She spent 3 months building the curriculum, which she did alongside her compliance work in the mornings before the department opened and on weekend afternoons at her kitchen table. David helped with the financial documentation section. Keisha built the legal framework module, what retaliation actually looks like, what protections exist, how to use them, how to document a situation you are in the middle of before you have the distance to see it clearly. Tom developed a set of scenario exercises, real situations, stripped of identifying details that walked participants through the decision points she had faced herself. Emily wrote the opening section personally. She rewrote it 6 times. She was not a natural writer, not the way some people are, but she was a natural organizer of information. And the 6th version was something she was proud of, honest, specific, and practical. It did not begin with theory. It began with a Tuesday afternoon in June and a vendor code that didn't match anything in 3 years of records. It began with what she had seen and what she had felt and what she had decided and why and what it had cost. Sonia read the draft and called her after. "This is good, Emily," she said. "This is really good." "Does it sound too personal?" Emily said. "It sounds true," Sonia said. "That's exactly what it should sound like." Margaret read it too at the kitchen table with her coffee. She read it slowly and did not say anything until she was finished. And then she set it down and looked at her daughter and said, "Your father would have read this 3 times and underlined the important parts." Emily said, "He underlined everything." "Everything he cared about," Margaret corrected. "He was very precise about what mattered." The day of the seminar arrived on a Saturday in April. Emily was at the venue by 7 in the morning, 2 hours before registration opened. She walked through the setup, the chairs, the presentation materials, the resource tables. Keisha had assembled with documentation packets for every participant. She adjusted things that did not need adjusting because moving helped her think, and there was a lot to think about. She had not expected to be nervous. She had stood in front of a jury for 4 hours with Clifford Marsh trying to dismantle her credibility in real time, and she had been steady throughout. A room of 100 people who were here specifically because they wanted to hear what she had to say should not have felt more difficult than that. But it did in a different way. The jury had been adversarial, which had given her something to push against. This room was going to be full of people who were in trouble, or had been in trouble, or were afraid they might be soon, and they were coming here because they needed something real. The pressure of being responsible for giving them something genuinely useful was different from the pressure of being cross-examined, heavier in its own way. Tom appeared at 7:45 with 2 cups of coffee and handed her one without a word, which she appreciated more than she could have explained. At 8:30, people started arriving. They came in all the forms that working people come in, some in business clothes, some in casual Saturday clothes, some alone, some in pairs, some clearly together from the same company, and sitting together in a cluster near the middle of the room. Emily stood near the entrance for the first 20 minutes greeting people because she wanted to see their faces before she stood in front of them. She wanted to know who was in the room. She saw a woman in her 40s who had the particular kind of careful stillness that belonged to someone currently inside a difficult situation. She saw a younger man, maybe 22, who kept checking his phone with the anxious attention of someone waiting for something. She saw a couple of men who appeared to be there together, both wearing the lanyards of the same company, who sat down and immediately started talking quietly about something with the absorbed urgency of people working through a problem in real time. She saw a woman who reminded her of Patricia Huang's same age, same composed wariness, The look of someone who had been in an institution long enough to have seen things and had spent a long time deciding what, if anything, to do about what she had seen. At 9:15, she walked to the front of the room. The room settled the way rooms settle when the person who is supposed to speak arrives at the front, a gradual, quiet, not immediate. The individual sounds tapering off until the silence was enough. Emily looked at the room for a moment. 104 people. She had counted. "My name is Emily Carter," she said. 18 months ago, I was dragged through a hotel lobby with my hands tied behind my back and a gag in my mouth while the man who had arranged it told 60 witnesses that I had stolen $42,000 from the company vault. She paused. I hadn't. He had, and I had 4 months of evidence proving it, which nobody knew about yet, and I could not say a single word. The room was very still. "I want to start there," she said, "because I want you to understand that what I'm going to talk about today is not theoretical. I'm not going to talk about best practices in the abstract or give you a framework that makes sense in a business school case study and falls apart the moment a real human being is inside a real situation with real consequences. I'm going to talk about what I did, what I should have done differently, what I was afraid of, and what actually mattered in the end." She looked at the woman with the careful stillness in the fourth row. "Some of you are in something right now," she said. "Some of you are watching something happen and trying to decide if what you're seeing is real and what it's going to cost you to say so. Some of you said something once and it went badly, and you're trying to figure out if you made a mistake or if the system made one." She paused. "All of those situations are real. All of them deserve real answers." She began. She talked for 40 minutes without stopping, without notes, because she knew this material the way you know things that happen to you. Not from the outside, but from the inside in the specific granular texture of lived experience. She talked about the moment she found the first irregular transfer and the particular quality of the feeling. Not alarm, exactly, more like recognition, the sense of a pattern that didn't fit. She talked about what she had done, write the flash drive, the encrypted backups, the scheduled trigger, the careful documentation over months. She talked about what she had done wrong, or at least imperfectly, waiting too long to file the ethics complaint, not identifying an ally inside the organization sooner, underestimating how fast Nathan would move once he felt genuinely threatened. She talked about fear in specific terms, not as a general human experience, but as a practical factor in decision-making, what it does to your judgment, how it makes you underestimate your own evidence, how it makes you wait one more week and then another one more week, always waiting for the moment to be more certain, more complete, more safe, which is a moment that does not exist. "There is no safe moment," she said. "Not for this kind of thing. There's a ready moment, or there's a documented moment. There's a moment when your evidence is as strong as you can make it, and you've protected it as well as you can protect it, and you have done everything within your power to ensure that the truth has a chance of surviving whatever happens next. That's the moment, not the safe one, the ready one." Someone in the third row raised their hand. She nodded. A man, mid-40s, the kind of face that carries its worries visibly. "What if you're not sure?" he said. "What if you think something's wrong but you don't have proof? What if you file a complaint and it turns out you misread the situation and you've accused someone who didn't do anything?" Emily had expected this question. It was the question she had asked herself 100 times. "Document what you see," she said, "not what you conclude what you see. The specific transaction, the specific conversation, the specific inconsistency. Don't file a complaint that says my manager is stealing. File a complaint that says on this date, this transfer was made to this account with this vendor code that I cannot verify against any existing contract. Let the investigators conclude. Your job is to document what's in front of you accurately and specifically, and let the people whose job it is to investigate draw the conclusions from there." He nodded slowly. "But I'll tell you something else," Emily said. "The fear of being wrong, of filing something and having it turn out to be a mistake, that fear is real and you should take it seriously. But you have to weigh it against the other fear, the fear of staying silent when something is actually wrong and watching it keep happening. Both of those things cost something. The question is which cost you can live with." The room was very quiet. Then a woman near the back raised her hand. She was the one Emily had noticed during registration, the woman who reminded her of Patricia. "What about when you've already been through it?" she said. Her voice was steady, but it had an edge underneath the edge of something that had been lived. Not currently in it, already through it, and it went badly. And you reported something and they didn't believe you and you lost the ball and it's been 2 years. She stopped. What do you do with that? The room shifted. Emily felt it, the collective recognition of people who understood what that question was really asking, which was not a procedural question at all. You find Gary Perkins, Emily said. The woman frowned slightly. Who? Gary Perkins worked at the same resort where I worked. 9 years before me, he filed a complaint about inflated billing records. The same person Nathan Brooks had him fired 6 weeks later. The complaint was buried. Gary home, believing for 9 years that maybe he had been wrong, that maybe he had misread things, that maybe the problem was in him somewhere. She paused. He wasn't wrong, his complaint was valid, and when we found the evidence, his name was in the file. I was the first person who tried. The woman in the back was very still. 2 years ago, when it went badly for you, Emily said, were you right about what you reported? A long pause. Yes, the woman said. Then you were the first person who tried, Emily said. You didn't know someone would come behind you and find the evidence. You didn't know anyone would eventually make it right. But you spoke, and that matters, and the fact that the system failed you does not mean you were wrong to speak. She held the woman's gaze. What happened to you was the system's failure, not yours. The woman pressed her lips together hard and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Someone started clapping slowly, and then the rest of the room joined it, and Emily let it land and didn't try to redirect it because the applause was not for her. It was for the woman in the back row and for Gary Perkins in Tucson and for everyone in that room who had ever said the true thing at a cost and not known whether it had been worth it. Hey, after the morning session, there was a break, and Emily found herself standing near the resource tables when she felt someone behind her. She turned. It was the man from the third row, the mid-40s one with the visible worries. He was holding his coffee with both hands, and he looked like he was making a decision about whether to say what he had come over to say. I'm in it right now, he said. The situation? I've been watching something happen at my company for 7 months, and I haven't said anything. He stopped. My wife has MS. The treatment program we're on requires my insurance. If I lose this job... He stopped again. Emily recognized this. She recognized it completely and precisely. What's your name? She said. Robert, he said. Robert, can I ask you something? Yeah. The thing you've been watching for 7 months, is it getting worse? He looked at the floor. Yes. And the people it's affecting, are they people who can absorb the impact? Or are they people like you? People whose insurance matters, whose families depend on the job? He was quiet. Like me, he said, mostly like me. Emily nodded. Then the calculation you're making, weigh my risk against my job security, is missing a variable, she said, because the risk of speaking is yours. But the risk of silence is theirs. Robert looked at her. Come talk to me after the afternoon session, Emily said. I want to walk you through specifically what documentation looks like at the stage you're at. Not generally, specifically for your situation. He let out a breath that had clearly been held for a long time. Okay, he said. Yeah, okay, Tid. The afternoon session was running when Walt arrived. He had told her he would be there, but she had half expected him not to be, not from any lack of commitment, but because Walt was the kind of person whose plans were sometimes rerouted by things more urgent than seminars. When she looked up from the podium and saw him slip into the back of the room and take a seat along the wall, something in her chest settled. She continued where she was. She was in the middle of the documentation module, the practical mechanics of building an evidence file, what to save and how to save it, and where and why, and she did not acknowledge Walt's arrival beyond a single brief glance. She finished the module. She moved to the section she had spent the most time writing, the section she had rewritten 6 times, the one that Sonia had called genuinely good, and her mother had said was marked with her father's precision. I want to talk about asking for help, she said, because this is the part that people don't talk about enough in these kinds of trainings. We talk a lot about documentation and reporting and legal protection. We don't talk as much about the moment when you've done everything right and the situation has gone wrong anyway, and you're standing in the middle of it and you can't speak. The room was very quiet. There is a way to ask for help without words, she said. That sounds mystical, and it isn't. It's practical. It's about learning to signal your situation to people who are positioned to respond. It's about knowing before you are in the crisis who in your world you trust, who you have told in advance that if something happens, here is what to look for. She looked at the room. My father was a Coast Guard officer. He spent his career in situations where communication was difficult or impossible. Bad weather equipment, failure, noise, chaos. He taught his family that in a moment where speaking was not safe, there was a signal. 3 slow nods, 3 slow blinks. It means I cannot speak. I need help. Please respond without reacting. The room was absolutely still. On October 14th, Emily said, when I was standing in that lobby with my hands tied and my mouth covered, I looked across the room and I gave that signal to a man I had never met. I gave it because I had nothing else. And it worked because my father had taken the time 19 years earlier to teach it to someone and to tell that someone, if my family ever gives you this signal, they are asking for help when words aren't safe. She paused. The lesson I want you to take from that is not about the signal itself. The lesson is about the 19 years. My father taught that signal 19 years before I needed it. He taught it without knowing when or if it would ever matter. He taught it because he understood that the most important preparations are the ones you make before you know you need them. She looked toward the back of the room where Walt was sitting along the wall with his arms crossed. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she slowly nodded, once, twice, 3 times, and Walt Holloway, sitting at the back of a seminar room in April in front of 104 strangers who did not understand what they were watching, slowly closed his eyes. Once, twice, 3 times. The room held its breath in the particular way rooms do when something is happening that they can sense but not name. Emily looked back at the audience. Some of you saw that and felt something, she said. You didn't know what it was. You didn't need to. You recognized that it meant something between 2 people, that it was real. She paused. That's what I want to leave you with. Not just the documentation protocol or the legal framework or the 48-hour acknowledgement policy. Those things matter and you should use them. She paused again. But underneath all of it, what actually saved me was a man who had been taught to pay attention. A man who walked into a chaotic room and asked, what is actually happening here? Not what does it look like, but what is it? She looked at the room. That is the question this work requires, not of institutions, of people, of you standing in the hallway while something is happening, deciding whether to look away or look directly. She let that sit. Courage is not the absence of calculation, she said. It is the decision after the calculation to speak anyway. Because the truth you carry alone becomes a weight that will change the shape of you over time. And the truth you speak even imperfectly, even into uncertain ground, that truth moves. It finds the people who are ready to hear it. It builds on what other people have said before you. It does not require you to be the final word. It only requires you to be the next one. She stopped. The room was completely quiet. Then someone started clapping, not the polite applause that follows the end of a speech, but the real kind, the kind that starts from the center of a person and works its way out. And then another person, and then the room. Emily stood in it and did not deflect it and did not perform humility she did not feel. She felt in that moment the particular wholeness of someone who has spent a long time carrying something and has finally found the right shape to put it in a shape that other people could hold. Afterward, when the room had emptied and the chairs were being stacked, and Keisha and Tom and David were packing up the resource tables, Walt found her near the door. He did not say much. He was not a man who said much when a little was enough. How do you feel, he said. Like something just started, she said. He nodded. That's the right feeling for something that just started. She looked at him. He would have liked you, you know, as a person, not just as a rescue. I think I would have liked him back, Walt said. I think that was always going to be true. She walked with him to the parking lot. The afternoon had that quality that April afternoons sometimes have in Arizona. The temperature exactly right, the air. Clear, the sky doing the uncomplicated thing it does when it is simply itself. Robert, she said, the man who came to talk to me after the morning session. I'm going to work with him. Good, Walt said. And the woman in the back, the one who said it went badly 2 years ago. I saw her, Walt said. I got her contact information. I want to connect her with Keisha. There might be a case there, a retroactive one. She paused. It might not go anywhere, but someone should look at it. That's the job, Walt said. Yeah, Emily said, it is. They reached his motorcycle. He put his hand on it and looked at her for a moment, the specific look of someone who is deciding how to say the last true thing in a conversation before it closes. Your father told me something that night in the hospital, Walt said. After the signal, after everything else. I've told you some of it, not all of it. Emily waited. He said the ocean takes everything. Boat's equipment, pride, the plan you had. It takes everything except what you've given away. What you've put into other people, that's the only thing the water can't touch. He paused. He said he wasn't afraid of what the ocean could take from him. He was only afraid of not putting enough into the people around him before it did. Emily stood in the parking lot and breathed through it. I wasn't afraid, she said. I always thought he was braver than I was. But maybe it wasn't that he had less fear. Maybe he just knew what to do with it. That's what bravery is, Walt said. That's the whole thing. He put on his jacket. He started his bike. The sound of it was the sound she would always associate with this day. The engine, the particular quality of the air in April, the feeling of something beginning. He pulled out of the parking lot without looking back, the way people leave when the goodbye has already been said in the thing that mattered, and looking back would just be sentiment without substance. Emily stood and watched him go. Then she turned and walked back toward the building where David was still packing up and Tom was reviewing the feedback forms, and Keisha was on her phone with someone, her voice low and precise, already working the next problem. Margaret Carter called at 4:57. Emily answered on the second ring. How did it go? Her mother said. Emily thought about Robert with his hands around his coffee. The woman in the back row looking at the ceiling. The room holding its breath during 3 slow blinks. Walt along the wall with his arms crossed and his eyes closed. It went, Emily said. It really went. Good, Margaret said. Come home for dinner. I made soup. The one that takes all afternoon. Yes, Margaret said. I started it this morning. I had a feeling. Emily smiled. I'll be there in 30 minutes. She hung up and stood outside for one more moment, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to market the specific quality of this day, the weight of what had been carried in the shape of what was being built. She thought about her father who had made promises to strangers in hospital rooms and taught signals to people who might never need them, and believed without sentimentality, but with absolute conviction that the things you put into people are the only things that last. He had been right. The signal had traveled 19 years across a continent and arrived in a hotel lobby in Arizona on the worst morning of her daughter's life. It had moved through Walt Holloway and through the promise of a man who understood that some rescues begin long before the emergency in a quiet room with a lesson taught on the chance that someday it would matter. It had mattered. Emily Carter put her phone in her pocket and walked toward her car and the drive home and the soup that had been started that morning on a feeling, and she carried with her cleanly and without weight the knowledge that the most powerful thing she had ever done was also the simplest. She had refused to be silent. She had asked for help when asking was the hardest thing in the world. She had trusted that somewhere in someone, the lesson her father had left behind was still alive. And it was. It always had been.